been as resounding as it is clear. We are in an era of rearmament to respond to the short-term urgency to act and to support Ukraine, but also to address the long-term need to take on more responsibility for our own European security.
On Saturday, we also agreed a new £2.2 billion loan for Ukraine, backed not by the British taxpayer, but by the profits from frozen Russian assets. It is my pleasure to bring from His Majesty the King a letter. He sends his best wishes and his regards, of course, but he also asked me to bear this letter and bring it to you. So can I present the letter from the King to you?
Thank you very much. Am I supposed to read it right now?
Yeah, please do.
I will do.
I've got to tell him what your reaction is, so I need to know. I need to know.
He is a great gentleman. A great, great gentleman. He said he thinks the war's going to go on for a long time, and he better not be right. Well, I just think he should be more appreciative, because this country has stuck with them through thick and thin. We've given them much more than Europe, and Europe should have given more than us, because as you know, that's right there, that's the border.
What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you are not
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, good morning to you and happy Bank Holiday Monday wherever you are and whatever you're doing. I hope you're getting to have some well-deserved rest today. And if you are, then put the kettle on again. I'll keep you company for the next 3 hours and we'll go through all of the news and we'll be getting some of your views and going to be joined by some brilliant guests to discuss the lot of it. Fairly sort of dull out there on a Bank Holiday Monday, so let's try and spice it up, shall we? I mean, first of all, we've got a huge scandal of the amount of money some of these ridiculously failing NHS chiefs are being rewarded. About 3 times the amount of the Prime Minister. I know it's an important job and saving the NHS has got to have talented people leading it. But seriously, when you're nudging up to well over £250,000 a year and your targets are not even being met, serious questions must be asked. And Nigel Farage seems to have them all on the run again, this time over the Labour Party's big internal arguments over welfare cuts. He's going to be going to a working man's club, challenging the Prime Minister to do the same and say, see who they like the best. There's a suggestion today that he's going to attack Labour for their conversation about not cutting or keeping in place the cut to 2 child benefits. Would reform go faster? Is that the right way forward? And as I was discussing with Kev just at the start of the show there, the White House are now going to be monitoring Britain for our free speech. That's right. Charlie Kirk was over in the country, who's a leading Republican influencer over in the United States. And he was caught up with the whole Lucy Connolly trial. And he looked at it and said, this seems to be a little bit crazy, this appeal hearing. Why is she in prison for 31 months? I'm going to dob you guys in to my mates in the White House back at home. And he has. And Marco Rubio is apparently eyes and ears on the situation in Britain. What does that say about us? Since when did free speech becomes such an issue? Sticks and stones, right? Break your bones. Words can never hurt you. Get over it. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call if you would like to have your opportunity to peddle some free speech on the national airwaves. You can use that number as well to send me a WhatsApp message or even leave me some free speech in a voice note. 87222 is the number if you'd like to text me your free speech. Remember to write the word talk before your free speech. That way it doesn't get drawn into black holes and sort of weird things, grommets and gubbins up in outer space, but finds its way safely into the bosom of the studio here. We're on X at talkTV. Right, I'm joined now by James Heal, Deputy Political Editor of The Spectator, to kick things off. Good morning to you, James, and thank you for joining me on a bank holiday.
Morning, Alex. Pleasure.
Now, let's first of all dig into this story about the NHS rich list with nearly 300 health bosses who have been given packages worth over £200,000. Part of me thinks in the private sector, if you're running something as big as an NHS trust with that number of employees, then you're probably going to be getting a pay packet that far exceeds that. So what's the problem?
Well, I think there's two problems, Alex. One of which, of course, is that what you typically have with the private sector is remuneration tied to results. And what we have here, and the Taxpayers Alliance and this comprehensive study has analysed and come across, is actually that a number of these high well-paid bosses are working at extremely underperforming trusts. So, for instance, East Cheshire NHS Trust paid 8 managers £100,000 or more, despite being the worst performing NHS trust in percentage terms for seeing A&E patients within 4 hours. So that's a clear example whereby the compensation does not match up with the results being offered for patients. And the second point, Alex, is that I would like to have more detail in terms of people earning these salaries, because obviously in the private sector you have competition, you have people moving from job to job. What you see is you want to hire the best talent, etc. I suspect many of these people are sort of bouncing around in an effective monopoly in this country rather than actually having some competitive tendering for their jobs and actually being held to account for their performance.
Now, every time you have fat cat pay in the public sector, they always use the integer of the Prime Minister's salary as the marker, being paid more than the Prime Minister, twice as much as the Prime Minister, 3 times as much as the Prime Minister, which is £172,153 a year. Some might say the Prime Minister's not paid enough in the United Kingdom.
Yes, I mean, I think there's certainly a case for that in some respects. I mean, certainly it's a very difficult job, and I don't know why Nigel Farage would necessarily want to do it in sometimes, I think, given all the stresses of it. But look, I mean, the key point is that, that's what we're saying for someone who's going to be running, basically a G7 economy, going to be in charge of the nuclear codes, etc. I think that what we have is a really rigorous test when we come to our Prime Minister. We test the qualities and whether they are going to be good enough in Parliament. There's a clear accountability structure. You have to question the scores, hundreds of these people earning this amount of money, whether they actually qualify for it, and the mechanisms that are going to be held to ensure they're accountable. Because, as I say, it looks like on current metrics, there isn't enough of a sense of, these are the rewards you get, but where are the results you're yielding for this pay?
Let's talk now about the Lucy Connolly case. It seems to divide the nation. I have no idea why. To me, it's very one-sided. It's very clear that woman should not be in prison at all, let alone for the duration of sentence that she was given. And I have no idea how the appeal court managed to still find that that was OK. That was perfectly fine. She doesn't get visitation rights. Nothing to see here. Well, she could have not pleaded not guilty if she wanted. Well, no, she's got no experience in these things. That's what she was told to do. It's been brought to the attention of American influencer Charlie Kirk, who has immediately gone away and sent a text message to Marco Rubio saying, have you seen this case? This woman's in prison for saying, yes, unpalatable things on social media, but look at her backstory. Look at how the court case, didn't really happen. There wasn't really a trial at all. And America's pretty concerned, aren't they?
Yeah, massively. So this is the story that came in the Sunday press late last night, which was talking about the White House monitoring the situation. They've said that publicly now. And really, it's part of an increased pattern, Alex, which is that I think free speech is very much a touchstone, a lodestar for this American administration. It's something that J.D. Vance talked about in his Munich speech earlier this year. America no longer sees this as a case whereby Europe can be left to do free rein in terms of how it polices its own domestic citizens and clamps down on free speech. They see it as very much an issue for them. I think one of which is, it's something that their sort of base cares about hugely, and so there's a degree of which they're playing to domestic politics. But also, I think it's a useful way of trying to get Europeans to act in a much more MAGA American conservative way, which is that, for too long, the Americans see it that we've been in Europe been allowed to do what we want to do at the same time as living under American largesse thanks to the security guarantee. Now they're saying, hang on a sec, we're going to cash in our chips and actually say, look, if you're getting all this benefits of having the US EU relationship, we want to ensure that our free speech is being protected and our values are being lived up to.
This is not also about the fact that, you know, it's almost like the first warning sign of a society in distress is when freedom of speech disappears, evaporates. And America has suffered quite a lot of this itself, although it's not formally in any sort of statutes or played out in the courts, but certainly in demonstrations on the street, the identitarian political movements. And it kind of suggests, really, when free speech starts going down the well, that actually you're kind of trudging through a leftist quagmire of censorship.
Yeah, and that's something that they're very alive to. And of course, that happened before the election. Of course, there was all the stuff around Labour's connections in terms of campaigners going and sort of a centre for countering digital hate, which was something that sort of evolved with social media censorship, which obviously something that the Trump team were very alive to, given, of course, they were basically in opposition for the last 4 years and obviously had a lot of social media companies censoring a lot of their supporters' stuff. So I think that they're very concerned about the online element of that, but also the offline element. You know, of course, the First Amendment in America protects free speech. They're very sort of concerned about sort of things around protests and, of course, issues that their base cares about, such as the right to life protesters. So it was revealed this weekend that an anti-abortion protest was attended to by 5 members of the Trump administration. They flew over in March to discuss with them. So I think pro-life and pro-free speech protesters just found a very powerful ally in the White House.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of comes down to the old British tradition of politely complaining. People feel like they can't do that anymore on certain subjects. Let's talk now about Nigel Farage, who seems to be deliberately trolling Sir Keir Starmer at the moment, knowing that there's a bit of an internal war going on over the two-child cap on benefits, whether or not that should be lifted, winter fuel payments, all other forms of benefits, the cut of disability benefits, and saying he's the party of working people. He's apparently today going to be making a huge benefits announcement, has challenged Sir Keir Starmer to go to Working Man's Club and see who is more popular. Is this, Nigel, sort of, you think, politically venturing into uncharted territory for him in order to have a go at the Labour Party, or do you think this is now part of Reform's DNA?
I certainly think it's fertile territory. I think there's a lot of people out there who would traditionally regard themselves as Labour voters, but feel in office Labour hasn't really stood for much. They don't know what Labour values actually mean. And so he's attempted to go after that because people, I think, are attracted to, if you use consumerist terms, you know, brand loyalty, the branding of things. They like what Reform is now branding itself as. And I think what Nigel has been able to quite shrewdly do is sort of grow from being quite a sort of perhaps niche product of 10, 12 years ago, focusing on one element of British politics, Euroscepticism, and now taking it much broader. And I think that what he's identified correctly is across both of the two main parties and their voters, Labour and Conservatives, there's a lot of dissatisfaction with the current system. So when the system, the establishment rails against him, he's able to use that and catalyse that and turn it into a lot of into a popular electoral vehicle, which is why Reform are now on sort of 31, 32 points in the polls. And I think it shows that this kind of stuff, you know, standing up for British benefits, standing up for the welfare state, which provided a generation or two ago, and making out that you're standing on the side of your fellow citizens rather than those who are coming from abroad, that is something that's very electorally popular. And I think he can codify all that into one simple electoral message.
But do you not think that he risks actually hemorrhaging some support as a result of this? I mean, at one point, some might have said that Nigel Farage would have represented the Thatcherite wing of the Conservative Party. I tend not to think that's ever been the case, but that is what the public perception may have been at one point in history. And that actually there'll be people out there saying, and you talk about, you know, standing up for the British, there might be people out there saying about the lifting of the two-child cap with child benefits, that actually that doesn't necessarily benefit the average British family, especially the average middle-class British family, who tend not to have more than 2 children, not even having children at all, and that actually perhaps it is families who have come from abroad who have a higher birth rate who are going to maximise from this policy, and that rather than giving handouts, perhaps what he should be looking at instead is tax breaks for working families.
Yeah, I think there's certainly good arguments around that, and I think that, you know, there will be some who are more sort of perhaps ideologically alive within his party and around him in a social circle who'll be saying, yeah, look, well, what about sort of a bit of principle in all this? Surely you should be doing more about tax cuts rather than subsidies. What I would say to that, I think that the big question and the big critique all the parties are asking right now is how do we stop reform? And I think one of the main arguments will be fiscal responsibility. And obviously there's been a big attack in the past week. The Shadow Chancellor, Mel Stride, and former Cabinet Minister Simon Clarke have gone after Nigel on his figures. The key thing, of course, is they need to add up. And that means, if you're going to have massive tax cuts as well as increased social spending, those all need to be balanced together. And you've already got sort of the Office of Budget Responsibility making warnings. You've already got the Institute for Fiscal Studies making criticisms. I think, if Reform are going to be a main political party, they need to have their costings taken seriously. So I do think we can expect to see more people coming under attack. You can't have both massive tax cuts and massive spending increases. The circle will need to be squared, and that's going to be something you hear more of over the next 3-4 years now. I
think what Reform would say on this, as someone who has closely studied that particular political entity, is that much of this can be afforded by, for instance, significant cuts to the foreign aid budget and significant cuts, actually scrapping altogether of net zero targets, which they see as cutting a load of red tape, boosting growth, saving the taxpayer money in government-backed schemes, bringing down our energy bills, which would alleviate pressure on everything from private businesses, corporate enterprises to public services. Do you think that is a fair enough justification of costing?
I think that we'll need to see, obviously, the much more detail. I mean, and also it depends what else they're doing, Alex, in terms of tax cuts. Now, obviously, Nigel came back in September after the election and said that, the whole contract with Britain and contract with the voters have been binned, so a lot of those costings are out of date now. I think that I would say caution on the foreign aid budget. Of course, it's been raided to pay for the defence increase, which Keir Starmer did earlier this year. And obviously a lot of the budget now is being spent on hotels here. Now, obviously we can say get rid of the hotels, send people back to their country if they're an illegal asylum seeker. But I would say that takes a lot of time. So the key thing about this is all expectations. And I know that a lot of people who are backing for Reform think that, if Reform fail in office, where do those people go? And we're in a really dark place for democracy. So I hope that they do look at the figures, they do the costings right, and they get this right, because after 2029, I think that the British economy and the British state will be in a very difficult situation.
Very, very interesting, actually, to see someone representing the publication of The Spectator sounding relatively supportive of Reform. It seems to me that the needle is definitely moving out there. I want to talk to you about this man next. Let's have a little look at who I'm talking about.
Thank you. I suspect our paths will cross again very shortly. Let me take this opportunity to thank all of the other pundits that I've had the pleasure of working with over the last 25 years. You've made my job so much easier. Also, a huge thank you to those you don't see at home. The work that goes into making this iconic show. It's been an absolute privilege to have hosted Match of the Day for a quarter of a century. It's been utterly joyous. I'd like to wish Gabby, Mark and Kelly all the very best when they sit in this chair. The programme is in the best of hands. And my final thank you goes to all of you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for all your love and support over the years.
Well, it wasn't quite Theresa May's farewell speech with the ugly crying, but we almost got there. I mean, the BBC actually did play a sort of 7-minute hagiography to the man at the end of Match of the Day, which some people might think, well, come on. He kept pushing boundaries all the time, didn't he, with things he was saying, and eventually it smacked back on him. And perhaps they wouldn't have paid such kindness to anybody else in his situation, but been very much, here's the door, goodbye, we'll say nothing more about this. What's your feeling on this?
Well, look, I mean, Gary Neville was an icon of the BBC for 25 years or so. He was someone who they clearly valued, given that he was the highest paid star at the corporation. I think something like 1.3 million a year in compensation. But yeah, I mean, clearly, I think he's an interesting case, perhaps, in online development in terms of how someone's politics grow, and he increasingly became very outspoken. Obviously compared the Conservative government's record on migration to 1930s Germany, some of the rhetoric around that. Obviously there was the anti-Semitic rat he shared on Instagram. I apologise for that, but I think he was spending a lot more time online, clearly felt much more emboldened, and so yes, he's emotional now, and in some ways it's a sad end. I'm a Match of the Day fan myself, but it can't be any surprise really, can it, Alex, given what we've seen his behaviour getting worse and worse over the past 2-3 years or so?
Yeah, I mean, I never understood. I mean, look, I am an advocate for free speech. I think people should be able to say what they want, when they want, and other people need to have a bit of a thicker skin. It is just words. But at the same time, professionally, if that was me, if I was like doing my dream job, which isn't this, this is my second dream job. It would actually be being a commentator on Formula One. But if that was my job and I was touring the world and watching my favourite sport in the land and interviewing racing drivers, and then, you know, whichever my employer might have been would have said to me, look, you've got to stop waffling on about Brexit, all right? Just focus on the motorsport. It's not doing our rep any good. I'd have gone, right you are. I'm going to stop. I don't understand why he didn't.
Yeah, and also given the vulnerabilities of the BBC, a lot of people feel in an age of Netflix and streaming, there's a less of a case for it. You'd think, for his respect for his professional colleagues, sense of perhaps comradeship among them, he would have stopped all of this, but he clearly didn't, and so maybe he got too big for the corporation. And so, I feel for those people at the BBC who, wanted him to stay, but clearly his position, as you say, it was a matter of professionalism rather than about free speech and principle, given, of course, the BBC is licence fee funded.
James Hill, wonderful to have you on the programme. Thank you for joining me on a Bank Holiday Monday as well. We're going to take a short break now, but when I come back, I'm going to be reading some of your messages, which are all queued up here on the screen in front of me, taking some of your calls as well. And if you're sitting there itching to throw in your two-bit about whether or not child benefits should be capped at only 2 kids, the disability benefits cuts, what you think Nigel Farage should be saying and doing, is he right to tilt into sort of more left-wing economics? Is it true we're a socially conservative country but with a sort of soft underbelly when it comes to our views on how fairness is done in the distribution of wealth? Let me know your thoughts. 03444 99 1000 is the number to dial. That is charged at your normal network rate. 8722 is the number to text me. Write the word talk before you send your message. And then, of course, if you'd like to send a WhatsApp number, it is the same as the phone call number, 03444 99 1000. And you can also leave me a little titbit of a voice note to chew on after this advert break. I'll see you on the other side.
When he said he was going to stop the boats, we didn't think it was the fishing boats.
Exactly.
No, that's what he appears to have done.
The French always come in at the 1 minute to midnight in any negotiation.
Yeah.
This is their old tactic. The fact that the Labour Party were taken by surprise by this is just miraculous, you know. He sold out pensioners, he sold out small businesses, sold out farmers, and now he's sold out the fishermen.
Yeah.
This is a man who's trying to desperately get back the Red Wall from this existential crisis.
Right.
He's talking like Enoch Powell 1 minute, now he's captured Europe.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello there. Welcome back, and welcome if you've only just turned up. Where have you been the last 23 minutes? I was just about to have a sip of tea and I don't have one on my desk. Something's a bit remiss here. Just give me a hint to the people behind the glass. Yeah, that's you, Alicia. I love her, really, but I just pull her leg. Anyway, I hope you're enjoying your brew or your mug of coffee this morning, or perhaps you're having an early one because you're on holiday and listening to me from some sunny climes. Let me know. Right, let's read some of your messages. Amanda says, Nigel Farage is making a big mistake by wanting to abolish the 2-child cap on benefits. It is not fair that hardworking people should pay for some of the irresponsible people having large numbers of children, which they can't afford. I'm going to dive into this one. You know, I'm kind of torn on this issue. Because I kind of sympathise with Amanda, if I'm honest with you, that there are a lot of people out there who have children knowing that it will bring in extra benefits, or at least that has been done historically in the past, and I'm not going to accuse particular subsets of society, but at the same time, we don't have any pro-natalist policies in this country. We've got a crashing birth rate, which is part of the reason various people say we have to import the third world to help us out. So perhaps we should be generating some more offspring ourselves. And to do that, you're going to have to find some way to make people think it's a good idea or affordable. Here's my two-bit on this one, right? I've never understood, for the life of me, why no government has ever focused on actually making it so much more easier and actually inspiring people to both work and have children. Because at the moment, it still feels like a choice, doesn't it? At the moment, especially if you're a woman, you think, how on earth am I going to take all this time off work? If you're freelance especially, how are you going to make the numbers add up if you're not getting maternity pay? Also, even if you were getting maternity, if you want to go back to work, you're torn then. What are you going to do? Like, are you going to reduce your hours? You need flexi working. Is that possible? To me, it's blimmin' obvious. OK? You go down the Viktor Orban route, where you actually cut taxes of people having children. That way, more people have children. And without sounding a bit wrong about it, they're the people who are also contributing to the economy simultaneously. So you actually make it easier in that regard by giving financial perks, such as, in Hungary, I think if you have 3 kids, you pay no income tax at all. But also, why on earth, when I go to office blocks, the office blocks of my old employer, for instance, had a gym in the basement. It had a bar on the roof. It had a little coffee hut down there as you come into reception. It even had a breakout space so Tony from accounts could pretend he was 15 and shoot some hoops and then flop on a beanbag like some big man baby. But it didn't have a blimmin' creche, did it? Surely that would be helpful if a woman's like, I got to go to work, either I got to play Mrs. Miggins over there to come over and look after my kid, or I bring the child to work, drop it off in the creche. If there's any problems, I'm on site to go deal with it. I can also have some interaction during my breaks and my lunch breaks. I mean, having a baby wasn't invented yesterday. It's a perfectly normal way of, I don't know, prolonging the human race. And I've just never understood why policies like that haven't been put into place. That's my two-bit. Anyway, wanted to get that one off my chest. Now, Vivian from Liverpool says the 2-child cap, it should stay. Our Indigenous people don't tend to have children they can't afford. Lifting this cap will only encourage those coming and settling here to have more children. They have 4 to 5 minimum from what I can see. Now, this is where it's a bit difficult if this debate becomes a bit ethno-nationalist, isn't it? Because actually birth rates in migrant communities have actually fallen, as well as birth rates in our own communities. There is the argument that actually if we don't have, we've got a sort of inverted pyramid when it comes to our demography. This many young people, tiny little bit at the bottom of the triangle, massive amount of old people. And so actually you need a workforce to be the right way up, like a pyramid of Egypt, in order to sustain itself. And so, you know, everyone keeps pulling that immigration lever. Just saying. Right, keep your thoughts coming in on that topic. I find it super fascinating. Let's speak to Georgina now, who's in London. Good morning, Georgina.
Good morning, you vision of youth and beauty. Well, I'm ringing up about the freedom of speech. You know, we should have learned by now, Alex, that you're only allowed freedom of speech when you agree with the policies of the present Labour government. You know, this is a perfect example of why we need people like Donald Trump and Nigel Farage to step up and bring the Prime Minister to account for the depletion of our right of freedom of speech. And it is our right, Alex. This is what our forefathers died to give us. We demand our voice back. We want to be allowed to have our freedom of speech. We do not live in a communist country, or at least
do we not?
The last time I looked.
Well, I don't know. Last time I looked, if I'd been in a coma for the last 20 years of my life, I'd have thought we'd have woken up right in the middle of 1960s China. But there you have it. I just want to ask you something, Georgina, though. You said you want Donald Trump and Nigel Farage to step up. Do you think Reform have actually been outspoken enough when it comes to, say, Lucy Connolly?
Right, well, I think Nigel Farage would have been a lot more outspoken if that man had been given the chance to speak in the Houses of Commons. They are gulling him down on purpose because they know what he says is viable. The public need him to speak on their behalf, but he has to be asked to speak. He can't just jump up and say, this is what I think. That's not how it works in Westminster. You've got to be allowed to speak.
They do allocate. But they might argue that this thing is all done proportionally anyway. It's all based on the number of MPs you've got and things like that. Perhaps actually it sort of saves his skin a little bit because the polling's going up and up and up, and perhaps it's because he's not being held accountable.
Well, listen, Alex, if members of the House of Commons feel as if they cannot, or worse still, will not stand up and speak for the indigenous population of this country, then that tells you all you need to know. This is why the Conservative Party have lost their total trust of the UK. We need someone like Nigel Farage who has the testicular fortitude to stand up and say, no, this is not right. We're not going to stand by silently and allow this to happen, and we will do something to help Lucy Connolly. You know, Donald Trump and Nigel Farage can see this. And we need their assistance, as this problem's only going to get worse.
Look, I agree. Georgina, I rather agree with you. I'd rather more people came out and really made a song and dance about poor old Lucy Connolly, had the testicular fortitude to do so. I love that expression, Georgina. It's always lovely speaking to you, my gorgeous one. Right, let's speak now to Karen, who is in Bournemouth. Hi there, Karen.
Hi, Alex. How you doing?
I'm all right. Do you know what? I've had a bit of a tough week, but having your company is going to boost my spirits.
Well, thank you very kindly. What I wanted to say about Lucy Connolly is what the judge actually did, and I'm pretty sure it's under Keir Starmer's instruction, was he actually sentenced a 12-year-old child to extreme trauma, which is child abuse, and it should not be happening. That poor child, especially at the age of 12, a little girl needs a mother.
I know. I think you're right. It is sentencing that child as well, and the husband. The impacts on innocence in all of this is ridiculous. And, you know, in the UK legal system, you have to prove causality. It needed to be proven that she directly incited things. But I'm going to read this message from Dan in Kent. As usual, the left have manipulated our language to suit their ideology. In no way was Lucy Connolly directing or inciting people to burn down migrant hotels. She said, for all I care, hotels can burn. Of course, what she said was regrettable, but nearly 3 years of solitary confinement, this is the point exactly. And also, whenever newspapers seem to print an example of what she put on social media that day, they cut out another bit, which I think is very instructive. The bit that says, I would, you know, I do X, do Y for all I care, which is like me saying, Alicia, you can chuck that tea over your head for all I care. I'm still playing with her eyes right now. It's brilliant. But I don't mean I actually want her to do that. She knows that I'm not being serious because I added for all I care. And equally, she then said, when I think about the parents of those children. That's what why is that bit never quoted? Huh? When they do a sort of synopsis of her post, because every word counts here. And she wasn't allowed to take it to trial. Well, technically she was, but she was told not to. And she's never had a brush with the law before. She's probably scared to death about even being dragged to a police cell. Yes, I'll do everything I can. I'll just agree with what you say. I'll go along with everything because I just don't want this to get any worse. Poor wee lamb. I think it's disgusting. And I hope more people stand up and really fight for Lucy, because I just think this is a really horrific indictment on our country. Karen, thank you ever so much for your thoughts on the matter, and thank you, of course, to Dan in Kent for his text as well. We're going to be reading more of your texts, and I hope you're taking more of your calls in future. You can register your interest to be patched through to the studio right now, and lovely Alicia, who I adore, will take your call. It's 0344 499 1000, and then when the time is right, she will patch you through to the studio. 8722 is the number to text. You can write talk before your message, or of course use the long number for WhatsApp. I'm going to take another advert break now because someone's got to pay my wages. And when we come back, we're going to be talking about the latest in Ukraine, because Trump, well, he ain't no fan of Vlad anymore, is he? That's coming up after this.
UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there, welcome back to the programme. Well, Donald Trump, when being interviewed, getting onto Air Force One about Putin's latest action, has said he's not happy. He's not happy with his Russian counterpart at all. He actually said, what the hell happened to him? He's killing a lot of people. And he later called Putin absolutely crazy. He didn't miss the opportunity to have a little dig at Volodymyr Zelensky, accusing him of every time he opens his mouth making things worse. But now it seems to me that Putin might have finally realised that Trump might have finally realised that Putin is rather playing him and the rest of the world. And all of the ego stroking has done him no favours. So what happens next? Let's speak to Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, who's a former commander of the US Army in Europe. Hello there, Ben. How are you today?
Hello, Alex. Good morning.
Good morning. Now, for us in Europe over here, I personally would say I'm glad, finally, that Trump has suddenly turned around and said, the guy's crazy, we're going to have to do something about this, because, you know, I think a lot of us over in the West have been looking at the ongoing situation going, the guy's crazy, someone's got to do something about this. Of course, European leaders have done naffle because they're absolutely useless hand-wringing wets. But is this now going to indicate a huge volte-face in the American strategy towards Russia and Ukraine?
No, unfortunately, no. It is preposterous to think that Donald Trump actually is going to do anything to help Ukraine in a meaningful way or to put pressure on Vladimir Putin. You know, he bragged and bragged and bragged for months that he could solve this in 24 hours, that it wouldn't even be that difficult. And obviously, he didn't have a clue of how to do it. And he has, exactly as you've described, been played by Putin all along. But that doesn't mean that even though maybe he's a little frustrated, he's going to do anything. I will be convinced when he starts unlocking the resources for Ukraine, especially air defense, to protect innocent people from being killed, and also all the economic tools and leverage that he has. I mean, working with our European allies could shut down Russia's ability to export oil and gas using this illegal shadow fleet. That would bring this to an end. He's not willing to do it.
Do we know for sure he's not willing to do it? Because there was sort of murmurings that he's going to have a look at sanctions now. Murmurings as well that he might seem to penalise some of Russia's allies. He's enjoying himself going around the world whacking tariffs on people. Perhaps he might now be able to be convinced to do something, because at the end of the day, surely, if this comes down to a battle of egos, Putin's kind of showing him up.
Well, it has been my hope for some time, Alex, that he would finally be irritated enough at Putin for doing that, for showing him up, that Putin would overplay his hand. But I mean, what's so different about this terrible attack in the last 24 hours that where he finally says, okay, that's enough? I mean, I don't know. I mean, what else do the Russians have to do for Trump to realize that he is he mentally and psychologically is not up to the task? Now, I have to say that the Republican Party owns this as well. I mean, the idiots that the president has appointed to work on this, Mr. Witkoff and even Secretary Rubio, who used to be a really strong senator, have fallen well short. General Kellogg can't even say Russia is the bad guy. And so the Republican Party, the old senior Republican conservatives who forever have been pro-transatlanticist, pro-NATO, they have got to take action. People like Lindsey Graham or Senator Wicker, if they don't, then they also own this failure to protect innocent Ukrainian civilians.
What is behind all this? Because I've always tried to figure out the American stance on this, okay? And from a European point of view, there's division in Europe as well as to whether everyone should be helping Ukraine. I kind of think you just don't go in and drive tanks into a country with a view to taking it over. That ain't cricket. But at the same time, I think there is merit in the argument of saying that there was game playing and proxy fighting between the EU and Russia over Ukraine after Maidan, and that there was a provocation, whether or not that condones Putin's actions, and I don't think it does. But what's America's view on this? Is it just that most American people go, Ukraine, I can't even point to where that is on a map. What's it got to do with us? And it's that sort of domestic political inertia that is preventing support. Or does this go deeper? Is there something a little bit funny or smelly about the relationship between Donald Trump and the Kremlin?
Well, first, I'm not going to agree with your assertion that somehow Russia was provoked by what Europe was doing with Ukraine. I mean, what's provocative about people wanting to be free and integrated to the West versus being under the Russian thumb? But set that aside, I also cannot figure out what is it about Putin that Trump is unable to or unwilling to take strong action, because the president really has had more leverage than ever to cause Putin to change behavior, and he's been unwilling to do it. Now, the Biden administration, which I thought did a pretty good job on many things, did a terrible job of explaining to the American people why Ukraine matters. And it does matter to Americans. And you are fair to say that most Americans may not be sure exactly where Ukraine is. By the way, I live in Germany, so I have a sense of how Europeans look at this as well. And not many Europeans are really willing to say this is important for them also. But it is about, from an economic standpoint, Ukraine has such an important role providing grain to the world. So with what Russia's doing, it's affecting food prices in Europe and the U.S., and it's also affecting energy prices in Europe and the U.S. And putting millions of refugees on the road, which is a Russian weaponization of refugees, obviously puts enormous strain on societies here in Europe as well.
What I don't understand as well, I'm glad you talked about things like the grain and the fertilizer that is necessary to feed the world, actually, and that the fact that Putin is playing with this and energy supplies, it brings me on to thinking so much of this, as I'm sure you'll agree, comes down to the control of maritime routes, being able to obstruct the smooth transit of whether it's fuel, whether it's goods, whether it's agricultural produce, enable to mess about with global inflation, energy prices, have people under your thumb. And when it comes to that, what is it that that Trump can't seem to see about the unholy alliance with all of America's other enemies? The sort of anti-Western axis, there's the hand-in-glove strategies of Russia, Iran and China, particularly China, who Trump especially doesn't like, and many around him especially are very wary of, and rightfully so. Well, can't they see that Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin are very much in hock with one another?
Yeah, this is a great point. I'm glad you brought it up. Look, the Chinese are watching to see, and they can see so far that the West, including the United States, lacks the political will to do what's necessary to protect sovereignty, to protect freedom of navigation, to enforce international law. And the Chinese are also seeing that Trump is apparently somewhat flexible when it comes to this sovereignty thing about, well, let the Russians have Crimea or some territory. I mean, the administration gave that away in the very first days of the administration. So the Chinese will take from that the U.S. has flexibility when it comes to sovereignty. That's bad news for Taiwan. That's bad news for these other islands and atolls out in the South China Sea and the Philippines. So I think the administration should be connecting the dots, that helping Ukraine defeat Russia, not only will that isolate Iran, which has no other friends in Russia, it will also send a very strong message to China that the West will, in fact, protect sovereignty, protect freedom of navigation, and protect international law.
Well, you'll be pleased to know that the office of that little pin-headed thug over in Moscow, the Kremlin, has said in the last few moments that the US president was full of emotional overload and said whatever decisions the Russian leader makes are necessary for the security of Russia. I mean, Putin thinks he can go tit for tat with Trump over this. Is that going to play out?
Well, Putin right now believes he has taken the measure of Trump and is going to continue to show a total lack of respect for this administration. So this is where, and this is unfortunate, it's embarrassing to me that the United States is not standing up to Russia, even though we have advantages in every other category except moral courage. Same for Europe, though. I mean, the combined economies and industries of European countries, that's EU plus UK plus Norway and Canada, dwarfs Russia. So it's unbelievable to me that leaders outside of the U.S. have thus far failed to take decisive action, even though it did look 2 weeks ago that they were going to do this. They haven't yet.
Ben Hodges, Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, that is, former commander of the US Army in Europe. Thank you ever so much. Fascinating stuff. You know, it almost seems to me Putin is now poking at Trump, going, come on then, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And I'm like, yeah, mate, what are you going to do? I'm kind of interested here. What do you think he's going to do? What do you think he should do? 03444991000 is the number to call if you have any geopolitical musings you would like to share with the congregation. You can also send me a WhatsApp on that number or leave me a voice note. 87222 is the number to text, like talk before your text. That way, all the sort of various spy satellites and space junk that was put out by Soviet Russia back in 1978 isn't going to gobble it up. Instead, it will find its way here so I can read it out. We're on X at talkTV. Now, when I come back, we're going to be discussing the BBC and whether or not the sort of, the hagiography to Gary Lineker, the 7-minute tribute at the end of his final match of the day performance was emotional overload, to quote the Kremlin, for want of a better sentence. That one just popped in front of my eyes a few minutes ago, so it's kind of stuck in the prefrontal cortex at the moment. And also the fact that a Women's Hour presenter has been complained about for being biased and bigoted. What's going on at the BBC and what should we do about it? That's coming up after this.
It is a team game.
Yeah.
And Rupert, I think, is constitutionally unable to be a team player. Now, there are things that could have been done to mitigate that. He could have been given work to do. The devil does make work for idle hands. He could have been given a job. Go away and draft and come up with an immigration policy, Rupert. Come back to us after doing the hard work, doing the hard graft, doing the miles, getting the information, doing the research. Come back to us with a reasoned, considered immigration policy to take forward to 2029. That would have been a useful thing.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello, welcome back. Are you a football fan? Were you watching Gary Lineker's final appearance on Match of the Day yesterday? Disclaimer, I wasn't, because I don't like football, and I can't really say I've got many warm feelings towards Gary Lineker either. But apparently they played a big, long 7-minute broadcast of all the highlights, him starting off as a fresh-faced footballer, never got a yellow card, everyone keeps being reminded of that one, and then going on to basically be the figurehead for football on the BBC for a quarter of a century. Pretty mean feat, that one. And then after the hagiography, Gary Lineker had his own little payoff, which almost turned into a little bit of a Theresa May ugly, gulping, crying mess. Here it was.
Thank you. I suspect our paths will cross again very shortly. Let me take this opportunity to thank all of the other pundits that I've had the pleasure of working with over the last 25 years. You've made my job so much easier. Also, a huge thank you to those you don't see at home. The work that goes into making this iconic show. It's been an absolute privilege to have hosted Match of the Day for a quarter of a century. It's been utterly joyous. I'd like to wish Gabby, Mark and Kelly all the very best when they sit in this chair. The programme is in the best of hands. And my final thank you goes to all of you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for all your love and support over the years.
Wow, you could hear that slight constriction in the throat there at the end. Maybe he has a few regrets, who knows? But has the BBC's handling of this been suitable? Let's speak to Lord Ed Vaizey, who, of course, was a former Conservative Culture Minister. Ed, thank you so much for coming on the programme. BBC have really stuck their neck out again, giving him a very sentimental payoff when perhaps other people they might have just booted out of the door, when he's been a bit of a troublesome priest for them, hasn't he?
Yeah, he's not been very helpful at all, Gary Lineker, for quite a few years now, since he got addicted to sharing his opinions on social media. And it's led to a big debate about whether people like Gary Lineker should voice pretty strong opinions on issues like immigration, issues like Gaza and the like. I did not support him doing that. I'm all in favour of people having free speech, speaking their mind. I'm speaking on a channel that champions free speech. And I also acknowledge that from my perspective, there's probably a bit of hypocrisy. If Gary Lineker had been tweeting regularly about how marvellous the Tory government was, I might not have been so concerned. But I do think there has to be a principle, which is that by and large, you should, if you're on a platform like the BBC, where you have, courtesy of the BBC, really millions and millions of followers, you shouldn't bring your employer into disrepute by voicing your controversial opinions, because for every person that applauds you for your point of view, there'll be people who deplore you for saying it, and that causes massive headaches for the BBC. You know, my life is completely fine without knowing what Alan Shearer thinks about immigration or indeed about Gaza, and I suspect Alan Shearer's, he's probably got views on both issues, but I suspect his views are completely fine, and I can watch Alan Shearer and listen to his opinions on football and be all the wiser for it. So
this is what I don't understand. Were there not any contractual obligations in place? Because, you know, say I worked at a supermarket and I went in with a big T-shirt going, you know, free Palestine on it or something, and sat out the checkouts. The supermarket manager might say to me, that's inappropriate to wear. You wear the staff uniform, that's that. You can go out on a process at the weekend if you like, but you don't associate it with this business. Surely, when there's a talent contract, I mean, I've signed plenty of these myself in my history of being a presenter, and one of the biggest things it always says is talking about reputational damage to the organisation, culpability for what comes out of your mouth. I don't understand through all of this how he wasn't in breach of something in his contract.
Well, that's a very good point, and I think any employer always has a clause about bringing your employer into disrepute, and that could be having a fight in the supermarket, not in voicing any opinions. You could be working for a law firm and end up having a fight in the supermarket. That law firm will be perfectly entitled to fire you, regardless of whether that affects your legal work in the law firm. So I think that Gary Lineker, you know, did bring the BBC into disrepute, and a more robust Director General might have taken action earlier. The trouble is, of course, again, it's a truism in life, that the richer and more popular you are, the safer you are. You said earlier, Alex, there are other people who wouldn't have been given such a great send-off by the BBC. The fact was, and we've seen it as well in Hollywood and the whole Me Too thing, talent tends to win out until talent runs out of road. And people will always keep backing the person who's bringing in the money. And the BBC didn't have the courage to take action earlier. But they're going to find out, I think, pretty soon, that Match of the Day without Gary Lineker is just as popular as Match of the Day with Gary Lineker. Right. The graveyard, as we know, is full of people who are indispensable until they're dead.
So something tells me that when people tune in to Match of the Day, it's because they like football, not because they're tuning in to see what Gary Lineker's up to. But I could be wrong as someone who doesn't give a hoot about that particular sport. Now, Women's Hour has also been attacked by Helen Joyce, Director of Advocate, the women's rights group Sex Matters, saying her views were misrepresented on the programme by Anita Rani. This is in response to the Supreme Court Act saying that women, turns out, are actually women, and that in the interview that Anita Rani chose to use a demonstrably, or the BBC chose to use a demonstrably biased and bigoted presenter to misrepresent her. I mean, is it, again, it comes down to the fact that perhaps the corporation is just overloaded with people with a certain sentiment who can't but help fail to disguise it?
Well, Michael Gove's Spectator has a trenchant editorial about the BBC this week, saying that it's full of people who are wildly out of touch with the feelings of ordinary people. But I tend to, I'm afraid, Alex, be a defender of the BBC. I think the BBC is a sort of anchor on quality in our broadcasting environment, and it provides a huge range of different entertainment. And for an organisation like that, which we all pay for through our licence fee, we're going to find things that we disagree with and get us very, very angry. Now, I happen to be on the kind of gender-critical side of the debate. I'm a member of the gender-critical group of Conservative peers. I think that I applaud the Supreme Court ruling. But I do also think that people who appear on broadcast and put their points of view across should be more robust than perhaps this lady from Sex Matters. And I think putting in a complaint because you think that the host is biased or didn't represent you in an interview, you're perfectly entitled and able to put your point of view. I'm often misrepresented. I'm very happy to take the rough and tumble of the broadcast media. So, but I do think, the BBC has to be mindful that it has presenters and programmes that take account of the broad spectrum of public opinion. And we know from looking at the polls where public opinion currently lies, and the BBC has to be mindful of that. And there is a danger. There is a danger in any organisation that the BBC keeps recruiting people who look and sound like the people who already work for the BBC, and they've got to have a more diverse spectrum of opinion, no doubt about it.
For me, it's all about actually taking journalism back to what it used to be, which is you could be a 15-year-old, leave school, do an apprenticeship with the newspaper, get your shorthand, be a hack, and guess what? The working class voice might be heard for once at the BBC, which would make a huge difference, I think, to the political stacking of their broadcasting. But I want to put something to you, actually, because I agree with you. When it comes to the BBC, yes, a lot of people, I think, who sit in this chair will say, get rid of the licence fee, it's ridiculous. But when you look at what most other countries in the world are doing, they're clamouring to have a BBC. Whether it's Al Jazeera or the Chinese News Network or Russia Today or France 24, loads and loads of countries would love to have a global news channel that is watched around the world as a form of diplomatic leverage. Now, they probably don't go down the route of impartiality with that, but I've always been quite sympathetic to the idea that the BBC, when done right, is a very useful asset. But I kind of come up with this idea. You don't tend to get taxation without representation anywhere else. I kind of think what would be good is when there's the next round of who should the Director General be, they should all lay out their stalls and say, well, I'm going to get rid of BBC 3 and 4, focus on 1 and 2 with the money saved. I'm going to put Formula 1 back on the network. Vote for me. That would get my tick. Someone else might say, well, actually, let's get rid of all of the sort of regional news stations that people don't listen to anymore and pump all of that money to bringing back the BBC News Channel. But to me, that would be a really good way of going about actually testing the water of what the general public want and actually putting that into practice because people are paying for it.
Absolutely. The ideas like that have been raised in the past. It may even have been the former MP and a brilliant man, Robert Halfon, who raised the idea of an elected Director General or at least an elected chair of the BBC to represent public opinion. You've got a BBC board. It could be possible, for example, to put people on that board. You have somebody who's appointed behind closed doors to represent England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales. But perhaps that should be a more public appointment in the sense that public opinion could be canvassed about who the candidates could be and they could put their manifestos forward. At the moment, I think the House of Commons Select Committee has the opportunity to kind of interview the new chair of the BBC. I'm not sure they can actually veto the new chair of the BBC, who is, of course, appointed effectively by the government. And it might be through our elected representatives that we find a way where BBC chairs, at the very least, could be subject to some form of public opinion and public test about what they want to do with the BBC. You're right. It's a public institution.
It would be a good move forward, I think, Ed. The problem is, of course, politicians want to curry favour with channels like the BBC, don't they? It ends up being a self-fulfilling circle. Right, we're going to take a short break now. Thank you to Ed Vasey. We're going to be joined by another peer after this, Baroness Claire Fox. I can't wait to speak to her on all the news. That's after this.
Is it transphobic to say only women have a cervix?
Well, it is something that shouldn't be said. It is not right. A woman is an adult female, and the court has made that absolutely clear. I actually welcome the judgment because I think it gives real clarity. It allows those that have got to draw up guidance to be really clear about what that guidance should say. If you want to fight for Remain, vote Labour. Now, there are some who say we don't need Brexit to work. We need to reverse it. I couldn't disagree more. Day after day, there are new allegations of sleaze, of favours, of privileged access. And it's all very well the Prime Minister saying, well, say now, well, I'm paying for it.
You've decided to repay £6,000 worth of gifts.
Lord Ali is facing an investigation. I wonder how concerned you are that your biggest donor was not fully transparent.
Are you saying you made a mistake?
It was right for me to make those repayments. Thank you. Of course, I wouldn't want Donald Trump round for dinner, but don't underestimate the danger to the world if Trump is re-elected this time around. I'm anti-Trump. I would like to send my warmest congratulations to President Trump on his inauguration as the 47th President of the United States.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to the show. It's a wonderful thing for me to have your company today. I really do love the fact you're here. Like I said, a bit of a funny week for me this week, and this is my safe space when I come in here. Whatever goes on in life, when I sit here and have your company, I truly do feel at home. I feel so much better about everything, just knowing you're there. Talking it all through. I'll tell you what, I lost a very good friend of mine the other week, Mr. Patrick O'Flynn. Don't know whether you are aware of him. He was a brilliant political commentator on the Express newspaper, then went to be a UKIP MEP. He was Director of Communications at UKIP while I was the head of media, and we just worked together. We had so much fun. Oh, we had so much fun. And he was such a dear, dear friend of mine. Whenever I had anything going on in my personal life, he'd be one of the first people I'd say, if you've got a moment that we can go for a drink, because sometimes a girl needs a sort of older guy to sit and chew over life problems and say, oh, what should I do? And he was all of that as well. And I just miss him terribly. Makes me want to cry talking about it. I just miss that man terribly. So just wanted to pay a bit of a tribute to him, actually. I know someone else who's going to miss that man terribly because she joins me now. It's Baroness Claire Fox, Independent Peer and Director of the Academy of Ideas. Good morning to you, Claire. So I was making myself blub then. Don't know why I decided to do that, but I have felt pretty down since we lost Patch.
Yeah, I mean, God, 59, it was very sudden. I can't believe he's not here. I mean, I can't get over it. So love to his family, but he's a great loss to all of us. And apart from anything else, I mean, his insights, his writing, whether it was for The Spectator, The Express, whoever he was writing for, when he was on broadcasting, was also crystal clear and uncompromising. And ironically, he was kind of had a bit of a centrist vibe in a weird way, because he was always very calming. He'd always be able to see all sides of an issue, never sycophantic, hung out with the Social Democratic Party, as well as being a kind of critical friend of reform. But the main thing was he took a step back and gave you an insight that you wouldn't otherwise get. So I miss him, and I paid a kind of slightly blubby tribute to him in the Lords, actually. I started talking about him and suddenly felt myself going, so I understand entirely.
Yeah, honestly, every time I think of him, it sort of triggers me a bit. And he was amazing, because he actually is the first person to really make the link between Brexit and the country's sovereignty and Labour voters. And he really cared about this country. That was his motivation. Let's talk about the political stories of the day in tribute to Patrick, who we can't have here giving us his thoughts. So let's see if we can do him some justice. Lucy Connolly. I mean, Claire, I don't understand why there's not more moral outrage. Yes, there is here on this channel and certain politicians, but out there in the general public, it seems to me there's a lot of people who think it's all right for someone who puts something on social media to be banged up. And I think that for a lot of it, what she actually said has been misrepresented. That actually every time that it said, well, this is what she posted, they take the top line, which sounds pretty abysmal, but they remove the bit saying, for all I care. They remove the bit where it says, I can't stop thinking about the parents of those little girls and what they're going to go through. They sort of make it seem as spicy as possible, and then seem to suggest that on some sort of time frame, when she wrote that actually directly led to people going out and doing what they did. But that's all bunkum. How on earth did the appeal court not reach the decision that I've just outlined there?
So I think the appeal court would find it hard to, because she pleaded guilty to that particular offence. Now, that's not to say that I don't agree with your outrage and want there to be more, but I think that the outrage should be about the fact that in the wake of the Stockport riots, there was absolutely Southport riots. There was absolutely a kind of politicised call to arms in terms of making a show of anyone who was arrested in any connection with it. And we do know that as a consequence, there was, CPS guy, posting things on social media themselves, which said things like, watch what you write, watch what you say. So this was very obviously a kind of warning shot, which was, if you say the wrong thing, you will be punished and made an example of. And I'm afraid that Lucy was one of those people. It's also a redefinition of what incitement is, because I actually thought that what she wrote was very unpleasant, but I do not think it counts as incitement in the law. And incitement is very tightly drawn in legal terms. It is perfectly right that you should have a law against somebody saying, I'll meet you at the corner and hand over this gun, and Mr. Smith lives at this number, and you go and shoot him. The person who does that is inciting, right? And that should be punished. This is nowhere near that at all. And the other thing that, of course, is going to certainly annoys me, is that we're in the middle of a prison crisis in which the government is bending over itself to resolve that crisis by letting people out of prison early, by going out of its way to say that people on long sentences for horrendous crimes should be let out. So the appeal court might have not been able to deal with it entirely, but absolutely the prison and the government and the sentencing people should be able to say, This woman is no threat to anyone. This is a speech crime. It's an absolute abomination that people are locked up in jail for things they say or write on social media. So knowing that, even though she pleaded guilty, let her out early.
Yeah.
That's what I think it would be.
I agree. And do you know what? What I think has gone on here is Starmer would have known quite what happened. He knew what went on. I can't imagine in any world when they found the ricin and the Al-Qaeda manual that he wasn't informed about that. So he knew what was going on, but he also knew what was bubbling up was an outpouring of sheer fury from the public about this government, about the previous government, about weak governance, allowing things to take place in Britain, or what they perceive to be things taking place in Britain, which is causing direct harm to innocent people. And I think a lot like a lot of tyrannical regimes, the criticism of the government wasn't something that Starmer was able to deal with. He didn't address the public. He didn't sit and say, I get what you're going through. You have every right to be angry. I'm going to be, I'm going to come down on this like a ton of bricks. He called people far-right thugs. The way he decided to communicate was so ostracising and alienating, and that didn't quell people's anger. So instead, as you said, he's used people, a conveyor belt of warning signs. Look, if you do this and you do that, you're going to be like them, you're going to end up in prison. It's the sort of funny, deranged politics you see in places like Turkey under Erdogan.
I mean, I totally agree. It was so ironic, in the Lords the other day. Somebody stood up and they were talking about Jimmy Lai, and they were talking about, the Chinese regime locking people up. And a variety of lords stood up and said, can you imagine what kind of country locks people up for their opinions? Yeah. And I heckled under my breath, it's called the UK. Do you know what I mean? Because we get on a moral high horse about authoritarian regimes locking people up for expressing their opinions. Yet in this country, 30 people a day are arrested for speech-related crimes. And I think that the epitome of that has been Lucy Connolly. We all know about this incredibly over-the-top prison sentence. But in fact, it happens regularly. And we do know that the police, who we, tear our hair out when something gets stolen or when some crime is committed in our local area and we can't get the police to intervene, when we can see open criminality around us, are too busy scouring social media postings to see if there's somebody they can pick up for something they've posted on Instagram or something they posted on X or whatever. So I think we've got to a point where this is having an impact of undermining trust in policing and in criminal justice. And I think that it's just the gap between this sort of situation where the sentencing review comes out and we let people out of prison early, but there are certain people, and Lucy Connolly has become, in a way, God knows she doesn't want to be, God love her and her family, the poster child, in a way, for those of us who are saying this is an absolute abuse of power. So I'm glad that the American administration, I've raised this. I'm glad that it's been handed over to Rubio and so on. I think it's perfectly appropriate. I do have to say there's quite a lot of things happening in America which are attacks on First Amendment rights that maybe I'd say, well, I could criticize back. But nonetheless, I think it's perfectly appropriate for the American government to say, we find it disturbing. This case seems to indicate that you have scant regard for free speech. And just like we can get on a high horse about, what's happening in Hong Kong, what's happening in China, what's happening in Erdogan's Turkey, then, in fact, why wouldn't people condemn the UK for what I think is really an embarrassing abdication of civil liberties?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. Now, what about this in terms of an abrogation of civil liberties? Apparently 2 trans patients a day are having their bits removed on the NHS. That's according to the Telegraph. 20 million quid in taxpayers' money was spent on feminising genital surgery, i.e. one assumes that's chopping off male parts and poking it all inside to make some sort of fake thing. But the problem is this has included teenagers over the course of 3 years, despite warnings the procedure causes long-term harm. This is irreversible surgery that will leave them infertile. 18-year-olds were among those going under the knife. I mean, point one, why on earth is the NHS paying for this? Why are we paying for these surgeries, which, quite frankly, are contentious and very costly and relatively untested and experimental in the first place? And secondly, you know, some people might say, well, you've reached the age of majority at 18, you can get married, have a credit card, have a tattoo, and have your bits chopped off. But what we have seen is so many people who've gone down this route, it doesn't seem to be the elixir of what is a psychological problem. It rather reminds me of the sort of things that went on in Victorian asylums when people with PTSD were given electric shock therapy and had the frontal lobe removed from their brains.
Yeah, I mean, this is actually genuinely a shocking story, isn't it? A third of those that have had this operation are under 30. So it's you know, a lot of young people there. And as you say, some of them are 18, 19-year-olds. And I do think we have to spell it out. These are perfectly healthy people with healthy bodies who are asking for and getting on the NHS castration, full removal of penis and genitals, and the creation of a canal is what it's called, to imitate a vagina. But they're healthy people, and they are now going to be infertile, have very intrusive, horrible operations that they don't need to have, other than saying that I want them and demanding them. Now, it used to be the case that in some circumstances, the NHS did provide this for a very, very small minority who, after a very, very long time of assessment, were given that right. You know, just, you know, it was an extraordinary situation. Now, of course, it's become embroiled in political ideology. And so consequently, the NHS has effectively gone along with the notion that if you don't provide this service on the NHS, that somehow that means that you're anti-transgender, transphobic, and so on. But with due regard to, I think, medical ethics, because I do think there is a serious question to say, if you're going to damage somebody's healthy body in this way, mean that they are infertile and might well have post-operative complications. If you talk to the many detransitioners who've now started to speak out, this is not something where you kind of just have the operation and then you're all well and fit and healthy. Actually, very horrible things happen to your body as a consequence, based on an ideology rather than a medical intervention.
Dysphoria is a psychological condition. Like I said, I really struggle to see the difference between this and saying someone should have a lobotomy because they're depressed. You don't go meddling around with the hardware when it's a problem with the software. And, you know, Claire, I just want to ask you this. At some point down the future, I really do foresee this becoming a scandal. A bit like the infected blood scandal, the post office scandal. I think at some point in the future, someone's going to turn around and say there were way too many people complicit in this. There were the teachers and the teachers' unions. There were doctors and NHS leaders. There were certain charities. There were social media companies allowing kids to be brainwashed. And there was the government who were lily-livered and failed to do anything about it because they couldn't even ask the question of whether women can have a penis. And that at some point there will come a day of reckoning. The problem is whenever these things happen and there's a big national scandal and all of a sudden people go, right, compensation now, it's the taxpayers who have to pay that, even though the vast majority of people in the United Kingdom probably would have opposed this from the get-go.
Exactly right. And the thing that you have to bear in mind is that people don't just turn up at the age of 18 and say, I've now decided that I want you to castrate me because I'm born in the wrong body. That's something which, if you want, they've been socialized into believing actually much earlier on in school. And I think that the scandal is that social transitioning, this idea that you are put under some kind of command in a school that you have to use particular pronouns, you know, lots of youth charities that schools have gone along with and often invited in as speakers, suggesting using chest binders for young women, for example, so that they can suppress themselves, their natural bodies from growing. And we all know about the puberty blockers that have been used, the cross-sex hormones, which now the Cass Review has intervened in, but there's many, many people who've been involved in allowing this situation to arise. I do think it's a medical scandal. I think it's an educational scandal. I agree with you, because what you don't want to just do is say, you know, our day will come, you know, rue the day, there will be a time when we will get compensation. First of all, for those individuals, and by the way, the families, I mean, you know, if you talk to some of the people who work with the parents of these young people who have gone down, who've been encouraged, almost groomed to go down this route, it's a heartbreaking situation. But you don't just want to be, so they will all suffer. We don't just want it to be a scandal. And even now, as we speak, despite the fact that there is beginning to be a little chink of light and things like the law is being clarified, for example, by the Supreme Court, there are whole swathes of institutions, particularly public sector, NGOs, trade unions, who are doubling down and saying we refuse to acknowledge that there is a distinction between biological sex and gender, you know, dysphoria or gender woohoo, whatever. People saying this is my gender. You know, call yourself what you want. But even if you do demand that if you want to wander around dressed and as the opposite sex to that which you are born, feel free. I don't care. Live your life as you want. But to then demand that the National Health Service, under huge amounts of pressure, with too little resources, should prioritise doing operations on you to fulfil that individual fantasy, that's where you have to draw the line. Or that you demand of us that we call you by a particular name, that we have to go along with your fantasy. That's compelled speech, completely dangerous in a free society.
Oh, Claire, I totally agree. I always love speaking to you, Claire. There's the wonderful Baroness Claire Fox, independent peer and director of the equally wonderful Academy of Ideas. Guess who's waded into the argument? That's right, Nicola Sturgeon. She says, oh, yeah, of course the Supreme Court's ruling's right. A biological woman is a woman, but the law needs to still accommodate trans women. Just let it go, mate. This was your downfall. And she's at that, you know, she's at Hay Festival. I love Hay on Wye. That is one of the most lovely parts of the country. I care for that little town deeply. But that festival, the rotating carousel of leftists and leftist sycophants is just nauseating. It used to be about poetry and books. Now it's all about Nicola Sturgeon banging the trans drum, etc. Ugh. OK, right, we're going to take a little break now, but when we come back, is Reform Party the party of working people? That is what Nigel Farage is set to announce, with a huge slate of policies on benefits, apparently. It'll be interesting to see what the party comes up with. Benefit claimants could get more time to seek support for welfare cuts, as well as the Labour Party continue to push ahead with their cut to the disability allowance. We're going to be discussing that with Harry Phibbs, a journalist and local government editor of Conservative Home, after this.
Taken the political hit, burned the public trust, and now won't even get the savings or the market credibility that they were aiming for, as Harry put it. So, you know, it's self-sabotage. It's quite pattern, actually, because as Harry, again, put it, you know, there's a long list of Labour flip-flops. And, you know, going on in terms of Rachel Reeves, you know, the Chancellor seems to be stuck because I think you were discussing this earlier with your previous guest, Simon, that it's a credibility crisis.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there. Well, Nigel Farage is going to be doing a big media set piece tomorrow saying that his party, Reform UK, is now the party of working people with a big benefits announcement. Interesting to see how he plays this one out. Has he just seen a gap in the market with the internal battles going on inside the Labour Party since they said they're going to clamp down on disability benefit and are having a ding-dong over whether or not the two-child limit on child allowance should be lifted? Is he sort of abandoning what was otherwise, you know, people assumed a sort of Thatcherite approach to the economy and the welfare system? Well, we don't even know what he's going to say yet, do we? But also, how is this going to impact on the Conservative Party? Because I don't even know where they are at the moment. Last thing I read yesterday was they're all at it again, that they're all plotting to oust Kerry Basenock even before the time limit that she's supposed to have in place to get the job done and bring people back on side. No, they're going to wheel out Sir Graham Brady any old second now to start counting envelopes. I mean, when will they learn? Let's speak to Harry Phillips, journalist and local government editor at Conservative Home. Hello there, Harry.
Hello.
So first of all, let's look at the whole Reform UK thing, because for a long time people have said, well, you know, it's basically the backbench of the Conservative Party. It is challenging only the Tories, but I could have told you 10 years ago that that wasn't the case with UKIP, that actually a third of their votes come from the Labour Party and they're probably a bigger threat to the Red Wall. And Farage's current political opportunism could well begin to cost the Labour Party dearly. But what do you make of this? Do you think he's abandoning where his core vote is in a bid to sort of bring other people over?
Oh, I think that Reform UK have been doing extremely well. Obviously, we saw in the local elections making these dramatic gains, and I think, as you say, that's because they've been coming up with messages that appeal across the board. So people, political pundits who think of it in terms of left and right, is not how people, how normal people see it in terms of their daily lives and their problems they face. And I think a good example is on welfare reform, that the people, whether they've been traditional Labour voters or Conservative voters, think that it's important to reward work, and that if people are better off on welfare than they are working, then that's a recipe for disaster. And it's not even particularly compassionate, because people get trapped on welfare, and they might have a natural ambition to work, but they feel that they would be worse off when they're trapped, and then that gets passed down the generations, because children grow up in workless households. Now, Ian Duncan Smith did have some good reforms and made some good progress, and then after the pandemic, things have got worse. And if we just do nothing, if there are no reforms, it's not going to carry on as it is. It's actually going to get worse. The amount of welfare spending is going to go up. So I think it's strange, given that context, that Nigel Farage seems to be taking a soft line over this two-child benefit cap, because really what should be happening is that people, if they're going to have children, they should be able to support the families themselves. They should be able to do it through working, and they shouldn't be getting extra welfare payments via universal credit, whereby the cost is subsidised by the taxpayers.
Some might say you should take that within a sort of within the gamut of a whole range of policies. And I say that because I'm thinking particularly of someone who is a bit of a right-wing firebrand, Mr. Viktor Orban, with Hungary, who has gone down an extremely pro-natalist route, saying we want to reward people for having children. By gum, this country needs its next generation. We know we've got crashing fertility in the United Kingdom, but perhaps if that was partnered with the same sort of immigration strategy that Hungary has, which is pull down the shutters, you ain't coming in, that actually put the two things together, and suddenly it could become a popular policy.
Yeah, but this particular policy, the two-child cap, that's not for child benefit that goes to everybody, regardless of how many children you have or how rich you are. Goes to the mother. This is specifically part of the universal credit payment for people who are on welfare and who aren't working, and it does more to trap them on welfare. And if you get rid of the two-child cap, the more children they have, getting an extra £3,000 welfare payment for each child, on top of the child benefit, on top, of course, of the entitlement into social housing for more bedrooms, bigger houses. The more generous that is, supposedly compassionate, the more they get trapped on it, and the more that adds to the tax burden for the rest of us, which makes it harder for people working to be able to afford to have children. So yes, we need to be having more children, but the expanding the welfare provision is the wrong way of going about it. What we should be doing is making it more affordable in terms of increasing the housing supply. So we get rid of these excessive planning restrictions that have held back the housing supply, so people can afford to buy houses more. That we look at trying to have a smaller state with lower tax, that we don't get people on these Mickey Mouse courses so they're burdened with debt. What we want is people to be able to afford to get married and have children earlier, and that's absolutely crucial.
Do you know what? As a woman of childbearing age, I don't know how many times I have to constantly say this on air. It's so blimmin' obvious to me, the solution. It's about nursery. It's about creches. It's about being able to work and being able to afford that your children are looked after in order that you can work. And any government that doesn't realise that that's a silver bullet are a bunch of morons. I just want to quickly ask you before I let you go, plotting to remove Kemi, I mean, are they going to do it?
I would think I would be surprised if there was a leadership challenge to Kemi Badenoch personally. I know there's a lot of speculation about it. I mean, one clue is that you normally get a certain proportion of Conservative MPs who'll go public, and a certain proportion who'll keep it private and send in letters privately. So far, there hasn't been a single Conservative MP who's publicly said that Kemi Badenoch should go. I think that she had a good day yesterday, coming up with a robust stance in terms of this two-child benefit thing. So I think that was a clear, distinctive Conservative message that will have got her some support. I think probably all the speculation is a bit overblown at this stage. I think the mood is to give her a chance to get the party sorted out and to get some policies sorted out.
I tell you what, the more instability that appears inside the Conservative Party, the worse that polling's going to look, and then the more they think they're going to need to get rid of her, so it becomes a bit of a doom loop, doesn't it? Harry, thank you ever so much. Do you know, lots of people messaging about the two-children cap. What is Nigel doing? The cap needs to stay. I'd go one step further and only pay it to a household income of $40,000 or less. When I had my two children, I didn't use one penny of the allowance. I didn't need it, so I gave it to them on their 18th birthday. Our total household income was £35,000 at the time. Let's face it, who is this really going to benefit? Why should we pay for people having children they cannot afford? This seems to be the majority of the sentiment. Barry from Suffolk, child support. Why does it have to be a limit of 2 children or every child? Why not a compromise? Say 3 children. First child gets the full amount, second gets less, third gets less. Multiple births get full amount each. I suppose you mean like twins, triplets, things like that. The overall increase in benefit would not be much more than the existing 2-child cap. People would not have more than 3 children to gain benefits. I think just, you know, why are we looking... I don't understand. We're going down the route of the benefits. Surely we should be a nation of encouragement and aspiration and say you can do both. You can work and have children. That way you're contributing to the economy and we're building up our native population. And the way to do that, it's very simple. You just got to make it easier for women to be able to do both. That isn't about wanging 100 quid in a bank account at the end of the month. It's about saying, structurally, what do you need to do? For your alarm to go off at whatever time in the morning, pick up your kid, make sure the kid's looked after, go and do a full day's work, and then be able to go home and be a doting, loving, constructive parent. That's the question, isn't it? Why not just answer that one then? Just answer that question. There you go. There's my little political hack for you. Talking about political hacks in the same way that perhaps Rwanda might have once been a political hack or a deterrent to try and prevent people getting on boats to come over here. The Labour Party said it's a gimmick. I kind of tend to agree with him in as much as, even though it was a good idea, I always knew that every leftist lawyer in the country would block it, and all those nutters who glue themselves to, like, concrete would be out on the runways. So I kind of knew it was never going to work. But at the same time, the Labour Party are now rolling out something sort of similar. It's not the same as processing people abroad, but they are looking to countries such as Kosovo to take people whose asylum has been rejected as part of a return hubs plan. We're going to be catching up with Stephen Woolf, former MEP and director at the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity, over Labour's cunning plan after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there, welcome back to the show. Now, Kosovo is the new Rwanda, both war-torn nations at one point in their sad history, but is now being sniffed around by the government as a country that could possibly operate as a return hub overseas. Now, Vjosa Osmani, who is Kosovo's president, said her country would be open to talks over a potential deal, but she hasn't said there's any detail to it, and they haven't decided. Hope it don't work out a bit like Albania, where Adi Rama said, "No, we're not going to do that," in the middle of a press conference. That was embarrassing, wasn't it? But there is a big difference. Like, everyone's going, well, why did you scrap the Rwanda plan if you're now going to have a Kosovo plan or a Serbia plan or a Bosnia plan? They do love going to the places where there's been a bit of war. I suppose they need their countries rebuilt, don't they? The difference is this. The Conservatives wanted to process people in these countries, to send them there while it was determined whether or not they were an asylum seeker. The Labour Party want to process their application, then the people who failed be sent there. Let's speak to Stephen Woolf to try and make sense of it all. Hi there, Stephen. How are you doing?
I'm pretty well, Alex. Good afternoon.
I remember that one of the big legal arguments against Rwanda was this word that I'd never heard before, but it stuck in my head due to its novelty, which was refoulement. And refoulement was this idea that if people were sent to Rwanda to be processed, then Rwanda might decide to send them on somewhere else. And I'm kind of thinking, well, what's the difference between the decision-making happening in Rwanda, which would have still been done by UK Gov while being accommodated there, and then the UK refouling people, because that surely is what it is to Kosovo. I don't get it.
Oh, well, that's where you get the beauty and nuances of international law on the UN Refugee Convention, Alex, because refoulement only applies to when you're actually making a claim of asylum in a country. It doesn't really apply afterwards if they've been rejected. And so the nuance that the Labour Party will be trying to say is that, well, once these people have had their decisions made, we've decided they're not an asylum seeker under the UN Refugee Convention or the ECHR, or indeed even under our really laissez-faire, let everybody in rules to permit people in, which is where about 60% of all claims are now accepted in this country. Refoulement doesn't apply, and therefore the ECHR won't be able to take anyone to court to challenge this. And, I kind of think of that, no one in any of these barristers' chambers, no one in the Trade Union Congress, no one in the non-government organisations won't try and use a little bit of extra money on the side to challenge the Labour Party. I think that's nonsense. We know that they will, but that's how they're trying to describe it, as being different.
But what I don't understand about this is, like you said, I mean, you say that the processing success rate for applicants for asylum is around 60%. I've read that it's much higher than that in times past. I don't know where we lie around now, but actually the problem is, France and Italy and Spain go, no, sorry, you're rejected. And then they come to Britain and we say yes. And even when we say no, they have 2, 3, 4 goes at appealing it anyway, sort of wearing down the system, getting tattoos of crucifixes, suddenly deciding they're going to come out the closet signing up to a prescribed organisation back in their home country and saying they're going to be persecuted for it. Lord knows, going out and committing a crime and saying, if I'm a child abuser, if I go home, I'll be stoned to death. People seem to know how to game the system, and we let them. So how many people, even if Kosovo does sign up to this, would Kosovo actually be welcoming in the future?
Well, therein lies the kind of weird issue of the Labour Party attempting to outflank reform on immigration and trying to attempt to argue to the public in the Red Wall that we are tough on immigration. Look at the language of our Prime Minister, who's saying that we are a nation of strangers. Well, you don't have to tell many people in different parts of the country, they already are. They know it. But I am tough because I'm now actually saying what you actually are experiencing. The reality is, at the end of the day, is most people do not want large-scale illegal immigration into this country and would like a deterrence, a proper deterrence. Rwanda was part of that element of deterrence. Kosovo will not be a deterrence because at the end of the day, you and I both know that we'll be reporting on numerous cases that will be taken to the immigration courts and then the Court of Appeal to say that these people will stay. And whatever the Prime Minister says, unless he brings down illegal immigration and actually deports people who are criminals and illegal migrants, then it won't matter what he does because the courts will stop him.
No, I totally agree with you. And I still don't understand. And look, we often have this conversation on this programme. I'm blue in the face from having it so often. The bloc are actually declaring a crisis. We know from intelligence, we know from what our own security services have said, the sheer risk of people coming across the channel illegally and how that is funding terrorist organisations, how that is enabling people to work in the black market. It's helping people traffickers make huge sums of money. And quite frankly, like those 3 Iranians that were arrested the other day with the plot, the bombing plot, it allows people who mean us real harm to get into the country. I don't understand why no government has actually taken the bold approach of saying, well, look, actually, this is now a national security issue. Here are the receipts. Our borders are closed in the same way that other countries have now done that. Countries around Europe are doing this at a rate of knots. Yes, I get the maritime law, but if the French can kidnap a fishing vessel from Eastbourne, surely we can say, would you like one of these dinghies back as well? Because I think it's strayed into our waters a little bit too far.
Well, have you ever been to Oxford, the Oxford Union, Cambridge Union?
I've never been invited, unsurprisingly. They wouldn't take a course old bint like me.
I've done several of these debates up and down our country. I've watched the future generations of our civil servants who will just do whatever they're told, and they're really desperate not to look deeply offensive at their dinner parties as they go home to their large country houses in lovely areas of the country that will never be impacted by the large scale of migration yet. Because I guarantee to them, the large numbers that are coming in now will not protect them forever. And so whilst they can hang their liberal, as they like to say, values on the wall, which really means relatively snobby anti-working class values on the wall, they'll continue to do absolutely nothing and protect themselves and prevent governments who do want to have enforced change. They will do so and make sure that they have procedures, policies, kind of argument, ideas, anything to dissuade the government from doing anything that's difficult, because that's in their nature, sadly.
I just don't understand what's so difficult about it, other than the French aren't going to particularly appreciate the cargo going back in the opposite direction. But, you know, when have we ever had to kowtow to the French? Although we do it all the time.
Oh, exactly. But if you listen to them, well, we've got to comply with international law, because if not, we're all going to be like Putin. Well, there we go. We hear that argument. Oh, we've got to comply with international law because if we don't do so, other African states will actually, and other countries across the world where our dictators will abuse their people. They already are. If we don't do it, then it's going to look really bad because you're all a bunch of racist and far-right people. Well, that word no longer matters anymore because you've abused it and used it out of turn. So quite frankly, you're running out of excuses to actually do what is proper and right, which is control the borders, stop criminals from getting into here, prevent people smugglers from making millions of pounds, ensure that large corporates don't make billions in profits and billionaires out of the profits of taxpayers' money, stop destroying communities in our country by having the total structure and fabric of our nation destroyed, stop preventing people from raising wages by using cheap labour. If you can do any of that, by the way, with still having a halo on your head then actually we're recognised for what you are, angels, rather than the devils that you tend to be.
I mean, how would this actually materially manifest? Would it be a case of intercepting a boat using sort of, surely the channel's not exactly the Pacific Ocean, is it? It's one of the smallest stretches of water on planet Earth. Surely you can actually quite easily monitor things coming over that channel. If you can go rescue people in the middle of it, you can surely block them from coming in. Would it be a case of almost creating a barricade and pushing a boat back? Would it be loading them up onto a naval vessel and then going into French waters, which the French might consider to be rather hostile? How would we actively do this? Because the French wouldn't have to allow one of the vessels if we're bringing these people back and said, right, we want to come and dock in the port in Calais, can you give us a spare space? I can't imagine the French Coast Guard's going, oh yeah, you know, pull up to platform 4 there in your boat, let them back off again. So I mean, what would it just be, the optics of triggering a sort of international crisis?
Well, that's what the Foreign Office and the Treasury desperately want to avoid, in particular the Foreign Office, because I've spoken to people in the Foreign Office at dinner parties who desperately don't want to really upset the French. Maybe it's because they go on holiday there so often. But the reality is that you could have a flotilla of the Royal Navy boats that just go along the line of where these boats are coming up and say, this is our point of no entry. You can't come in anymore. And if they float back towards, and you could keep pushing them back into the French waters. The idea is you'd have to cause an international dispute with France in order to resolve this. And who has got the strength and will and character of a government, a prime minister, a home office, to be able to overrule their civil servants, the legal teams that might be supporting them, and actually cause this international crisis, that Macron would actually finally turn up to the table and say, oh my goodness me, the Brits are actually serious for once. I can't demand more money off them to support our camps or the wages of the people that we pay that should be doing their job. We can't upset them and demand that we want more fishing rights in our contracts with them as a reset on the EU. No, these Brits are actually saying they're sending them back. What am I going to do now? Because if I do it, Marie Le Pen are going to swarm us and win in the next election. My goodness me.
Yeah, do you know what? It'll be interesting to see. I mean, we've still got 4 years before anybody might dare to do this, because it's not in Starmer's DNA, and it depends on what happens to the government in the future. But it's a crisis that's not going anywhere for now, at least. Stephen, thank you ever so much. Right, we're going to take a short break now, but when I come back, I've got lots of messages to read and calls to take. 03444991000 is the number if you would like to speak to me in the studio. I would like that very much. 8722 is the number to text, like talk before your message. 03444991000. Also for WhatsApp. Write your calls and your messages after this.
I saw how well the EU had played Keir Starmer. They used their classic tricks, which they used in the Brexit negotiations. And what he has done, he stuck two fingers up at the 17.4 million people who voted for Brexit, in my humble opinion.
I disagree. Yeah, I agree with you, and I disagree with Keir Starmer with the way he's dealing with it, because that's anti-democracy, in my opinion. You know, people voted. He should respect that. He should deal with the problems that this country has in hand. He should deal with actually living up to his manifesto.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Alrighty then, messages and calls time, folks. I've been remiss at not reading this one out earlier because it would have been brilliant at the very start of the programme. It's from Pauline. We were talking with Claire Fox, of course, about the things that go on in the NHS with all these trans surgeries, and also we were talking about Lucy Connolly and free speech. Well, let's bring those topics of conversation together, shall we? Because Pauline says, good morning, Alex. Regarding the freedom of speech topic, I've worked for the NHS for almost 35 years, and the NHS organisation will not let its staff to even say what we feel. If we do say anything that is not wokery, we're put on a diversity and equality brainwashing course. After all the years of service, I will be retiring in 6 weeks' time, so look forward to speaking my mind. Well, Pauline, come and speak your mind to me, won't you? You can find me on @ThatAlexWoman on X. Drop me a line. I'd love to hear your tales. Lucy in Cornwall, I've this morning written to Reform and stated I'll cancel my membership if scrapping the two-child cap policy goes into the next election. A lot of people talking about that, saying they don't really agree with the policy. And then, Darren says, I never knew you were an F1 fan. Who's your favourite driver today and of all time? He says he likes Ricciardo because anyone who drinks from his shoe is an instant hero. Today, he likes Norris. Do you know, Darren, I'm just going to be honest with you here. Okay, for those who like Formula One, it's probably not that interesting. For those who hate it, it definitely isn't interesting. But I got into Formula One quite young, and then as a teen, I just picked the driver I fancied the most. And I've tried to make that my policy and my protocol for the rest of my life. Unfortunately, all the drivers now could be my children, other than Fernando Alonso, so I can't really use this metric anymore, so I've decided at last to be a patriot, and so this year I am supporting Lando Norris. However, in times past, I would stand accused of having a bit of a soft spot for, when I was a teen, Jacques Villeneuve, and as I grew a bit older, Sebastian Vettel. Make of that what you will. Right, let's speak to Philippa, who is in Poole in Dorset. Probably not about which F1 driver she fancies, but if you've got a thought on that, Philippa, do feel free to share it. How are you, my darling?
I'm wonderful, thank you, Alex. I don't actually fancy any Formula One drivers because I don't really follow it.
There you go. It's fine. I was not expecting you to have any sort of answer to that on-the-spot inquisition at all. What would you like to talk about instead?
I've always got loads of answers for lots of other topics, though, as you know from ringing up. But, I want to talk about Nigel Farage being a man of the people. He definitely is. Right. He's very approachable. I met him when I was in Runcorn. He's amazing to speak to. He appeals to a really wide demographic in this country, not just the working class, not just the well-to-do. His policies, most people just look at reform and think, right, okay, all they're interested in is illegal migration and sorting that out. No, they've got policies on everything. I went up to Birmingham. I've heard him talk about all the issues that they want to deal with, like helping the elderly, like supporting the vulnerable and the disabled and all those things, but also helping people, be who they want to be in this country, to be, if they want to be typically English and they're into their heritage and they're into their culture, to really promote all that because our culture is going down the pan at the moment, and Nigel's really fiercely wanting to support us being English, if that's what we want to do in this country, because it's just gone completely by the wayside with all these different cultures coming in. And yes, we've got to appeal to them, but because they're not taking on what we believe in and integrating properly, our culture, our English culture, is being whitewashed. So
really... I tend to agree. Philippa, I mean, the polling definitely backs up what you're saying. Of course, I know Nigel personally, have done for most of my adult life. So on that level, I'm always going to be a very good friend of his because, he's one of my besties, really. You can't erase that, can you? But I am here to criticise and point at holes in Reform as a party and the way they handled the Rupert Lowe fallout, what this policy is going to look at tomorrow. I'm going to be reading it, scrutinising it very closely myself. Philippa, thank you ever so much. Let's speak now to Mark, who's in Lincolnshire. Hi there, Mark.
Hi there, Alex. You all right today?
Which Formula One driver do you fancy then?
Can't stand the sports, boring as hell.
Fair enough. So I was going to see if I could embarrass you then. Right, what do you want to talk about, Mark?
It's like playing with scale electrics when you're a kid, just going round and round.
Yeah, do you know, I must admit, back in the 90s was peak Formula One for me. I loved it when you had Michael Schumacher trying to ram people off the track like a lunatic, and things always used to go down to the last race of the season. Even the crashes were better, and that sounds a bit dark, but I think every single motorsport fan out there actually quite enjoys it when someone goes off the track. Anyway, enough about Formula One. That is not what we're supposed to be talking about today. What would you like to talk about, Mark?
I was just going to say Nigel Mansell's the last one I gave us stuff about. But anyway, yeah, what I want to talk about, initially you had Georgina and even just your last caller there, with this delusion that Nigel Farage is somehow man of the people. No, he isn't. Because he goes for a pint and lights a fag doesn't make him man of the people. This is a man, because Georgina herself mentioned something that really stung my nerves a bit. Because I thought, what's she talking about?
What's that then?
She was talking about the indigenous people. And then your last caller there referenced the English people and stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of like, well, hang on a minute. This is the same guy who basically does not believe that British culture has anything to do with the indigenous people. That seems to be under the delusion that you can bring anybody you like from anywhere in the world, give them a pie at speckled hen, and they're as British as you and I.
Okay, so this is where, you know, people sort of accuse Nigel of being a bit soft, and Nigel's made it clear he doesn't want to go down an ethno-nationalist route, i.e. attach somebody's patriotism to the colour of their skin. But he has spoken quite widely and for almost the entirety of his political career about balkanisation, about people not integrating, about the dangers of that. I think he was the one who really started breaking down the taboos on that subject. So what element are you not happy with here, that you do want him to equate, say, skin colour with nationality, or that what should he be talking about that isn't quite hitting the mark for you?
What I'm talking about is when you're referring to this particular issue, because Nigel does what so many people seem to do with this issue. You know, like you mentioned there, the ethno-nationalism, because, that is far right. Okay, well, yeah, at its extreme, of course that's far right. Because at its extreme, you would deport people based on their skin colour or, you know, their heritage. That's what you would be doing. People like myself, you know, I'm a member of UKIP. We don't call for that. What we're calling for is a remigration of people who aren't culturally fitting into this nation, who don't want to learn the language.
Okay, right, fine. Okay. So how do we test that? Are we sort of like getting people who've been here for 20 years, let's say, because there's plenty of old biddies out there who came from Bangalore or whatever and never learned the language, and people who might be causing no harm to society. How would you put that into operation? What would you be doing? Sort of quizzing everybody, a spot check on the doorstep, right? You know, read this sentence, explain what it means, or we're going to put you on an aeroplane. How's that going to be exercised?
Well, you'd soon be able to identify the people required, wouldn't you? Because at the end of the day, these are going to be people that are using translation service when they're accessing state.
So if someone uses a translation service, they deserve to be deported?
No, they deserve to be questioned as to what's going on with their English skills, what's going on with their cultural identity, what they're actually doing here if they're not learning the language. Why, you know, so for example, if somebody's using translation skills for 10, 15 years, why are you using?
Okay, so hold on. What if Spain, on the basis of this, right? So we're saying English language tests for everybody. If you don't know English, you've got to start learning now. And if you haven't learned it in, 6 months' time, we're sending you back from whence you came. Whoever you are, whatever your ties to this country, that's that. But what I don't understand is if, let's say, Pedro Sanchez in Spain went around all the British pensioners and gave them a spot check in Spanish, and they said, well, you can't do anything other than order a pint of beer in a bar, off you go back home. Would you think that was wrong?
No, if that's something that the Spanish wanted to do, that's down to them. At the end of the day, Spain is their country, it's their culture, it's their heritage at the end of the day. What really bugs me, and this is where Farage doesn't fit the bill for myself, is because he doesn't have any detail into any kind of policy that he wants to do. He comes out with lots of nice little headlines. Now, with this particular issue, you're talking about ethno-nationalism. What it really comes down to is you have to have the opinion that if you wish to preserve British culture, the only way you actually ensure that British culture survives And it is the dominant culture that people adopt into. Because at the end of the day, even Farage himself will say cultures around the world that aren't necessarily compatible with Western society.
Yeah, he said that for a long time, hasn't he?
Yeah, he has said that. But what he's not saying is what he's going to do to ensure that that's not the case in this country. Because what we have at the moment is we have a situation where there are so many communities in our country that are so vastly, whatever heritage, whatever culture they are, whether it be Indian, Pakistani, wherever it is, where people are then coming into the country, into those communities. They have no need no requirement to get into the
I've got to go to break soon, so I'm going to stop you there, Mark. Look, I agree with most of what you're saying. I think what needs to happen is before people start turning around and saying, this is what I'm going to do, they need to understand the mechanism by which they're going to do it. So let's wait and see. We're a long way off a general election. At that point, all cards on the table. Whose policy gets your vote? But interesting insights from Mark there in Lincolnshire, who is a UKIPper. Thank you ever so much for your calls and messages. I'm going to read more of those in the next hour. When I come back, I'm going to be joined by one of my favourites, Matthew Laza, to chew over the politics of the day. See you in just a moment.
Good evening and welcome to Plank of the Week, the one show where you do not have to be worried about judgmental people because we'll do all the judging for you. Let's just have a look at how Humsley Useless is now spending his time.
There goes your career, mate.
Over there a bit is over towards where all the migrants come in. He's jumping there. There he goes. He goes over the bar. Hello, and unfortunately, it catches on his Johnson.
If he's Plank of the Week, he's got a sizable plank.
That's a whole different show.
Plank of the Week, Fridays at 7 on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. This is Alex Phillips with you until 1 o'clock today. It's been lovely having your company. Lots of great calls, lots of great messages. I've just got a message, actually, from Rupert in Great Yarmouth.
Do you think it's the Rupert in Great Yarmouth?
Is he in Great Yarmouth this weekend? I don't know. I don't know. But he is talking about reform. He says reform is wrong to call for the end of the two-child benefit cap. A lazy policy which fattens an already vastly bloated welfare state, starts with tax breaks for parents, make childcare affordable, let people keep more of what they earn, reward work over dependency. I must admit, whichever Rupert that may be, I'm prone to agree with them.
Broadly, me too, oddly. I didn't find myself. How many? My question is, how many Ruperts are there in Great Yarmouth? Not that many.
Who knows? I've never done a Rupert
It's not
audit.
Rupert country, I don't think.
But let's talk about this. I was going to sort of do that one last, but as we're on the subject, I mean, you know,
we should say hello
Nigel
first.
Hello, my darling.
Yes.
How are
I'm
you?
Good. This rather grey bank holiday, grey in London at least.
You increasingly look more and more like a graphic designer stroke architect every time I see you.
That's the Danish architect.
Yeah, there it is. It's sort of like really coming to its
I was on Peter's show last week and somebody messaged in to say I look like Groucho Marx. So does that make me a Marxist? I said I'm many things, but not a Marxist.
Good, I'm glad to hear it, because we don't like those, unless they're the
very
nice
mild,
reformed
very
ones, like a Baroness Fox, who's exactly the kind of old-school Marxist I enjoy. But, you know, looking at this, the Labour Party are, because the way I see it is this: they have made massive commitments to certain costly things that they're not going to let go. Net zero being the big one. And so when people say about reform, how are you going to afford they'd say, well, actually, net zero is going to relieve the Treasury of a significant weight. And they'll talk about things like foreign aid. I mean, it's sort of pilfering around the edges. Yeah, I was going to say pilfering around the edges on that one. But it seems to me that Nigel Farage has identified a big weakness. He's seen the Labour Party having an internal battle over this. And really, I think, I mean, you know, the focus in today's paper is all about lifting the two-child cap. It'll be interesting to see what he actually majors on tomorrow when he talks about this announcement, because I would imagine that he will talk more about the swinging cuts to disability benefits. I think that might be a route he might go down to appeal specifically to the Red Wall. Either way, it seems to me his intention is to get Starmer on the run. Do you think that the Labour Party have been a little bit too lackadaisical so far about reform? At one point, there was that sort of video footage of Starmer walking across the Commons and sort of grasping Nigel by the hand. They looked like best mates. And I think Starmer was like, yeah, come on, bring on the Farage. Let's destroy the Tories, until he went,
I love those moves, by the way, for those
like Chris Akabusi.
Those who are listening on radio can't quite see it, but it's worth looking back online.
It is like a Chris Akabusi awuga for people from the 90s who remember that. Do you think the Labour Party have been rather complacent about reform?
So I think what Labour thought on reform initially, in the sort of the joy in Labour terms of last July, was that reform were going to come for the Tories, and that what you'd have is a Labour government doing okay, having a honeymoon, and a battle on the right between reform and the Tories, whilst Labour kind of got on and governed. And if it wasn't loved, because it was a bit of a loveless majority, it was at least kind of given the benefit of the doubt. Now, partly because of its own errors, of which the winter fuel allowance is clearly the #1 error. It didn't have a honeymoon, and reform managed to kind of push the Tories out of the way with almost instantaneous speed, and therefore came for Labour a lot quicker than they were expecting. And I think then what they thought is, well, we can, over the last few weeks, we've seen the emphasis on immigration policy. We've seen, the chemical castration of sex offenders. To be fair, that wasn't a report from an ex-Tory minister, but still, it was talked up. So you've kind of seen reform-style language. What I think Labour is not complacent about, but just isn't very good at coping with, and I think Keir in particular, is Keir doesn't understand that Nigel will just, duck and dive. I'm going to do my boxing moves as well. And he what's that? What did they say about Muhammad Ali? I don't know what that cliche was about how
sing like a bee, bird.
Yes,
bee.
Yes, that. Somebody will ring in and tell us, or one of the producers will tell us.
Sing like a bee.
Yes.
I really want to know what it is.
I know.
Now.
Somebody tell us.
Why did you do that to me?
Sorry, we're going to have to spend the next hour trying to remember it if we're not helped out of our misery. So yes, Nigel is very agile. Nigel comes and he's a troublemaker and he's a disruptor, and that's exactly what he's now doing. So I think it's very hard for Labour to do that. And what Nigel is, cheekily you might say, siding with the Labour left. There's about 100 to 125 Labour MPs who are threatening to rebel over the existing benefit cuts. Those are the benefit cuts introduced in the spring statement, in the last lot. Never mind the winter fuel allowance, and now Nigel's trying to, make trouble. And of course, there's a bit of panic in the Labour Party because is Keir seen as having been too right wing on immigration? Is language being too strong? Not everybody likes the idea of chemical castration. So,
you're not allowed to say. Can't say chemical castration anymore because you'll upset pedos. Apparently, you've got to say. Hold on, because this is going to be my story. Story in my next segment. Hold on, where is it? Okay, you now have to say medication to manage problematic sexual arousal.
So I wonder what the acronym for that is. So Nigel, I think, has been very clever. I mean, I personally, you, me, and Rupert, if it indeed is Rupert Lowe from Great Yarmouth, is a reformed Great Yarmouth MP, or another Rupert, or somebody masquerading as Rupert. Their point is very sensible because I think what has really got to a lot of people in the Labour Party is, The winter fuel allowance was clearly a mistake. What they should have done is what they're going to end up doing, which is taking it away or taxing it for higher income pensioners. But the blunt instrument of only giving it to those on pension credit, which is about 20 odd percent, may gone up a bit because more people have gone for pension credit as a consequence, which is in a sense a good thing, but was far too blunt an instrument. It left people on pretty modest incomes worried, concerned, and not getting the money that they were expecting to rely on. And they'd been very clear in the election they weren't going to get rid of it. So that was a clear mistake.
But is the Labour Party's problem here? Because they're constantly having to look for more swinging tax cuts, scrapping this and the other, which is not really in their sort of DNA to start reducing the size of the civil service and things like that. Is the problem not that they just dare not let go of policies such as net zero, which is costing a blimmin' fortune, and the rest of the world seem to be moving in a different direction to this?
Well, I think, you said how's it going to be paid for? So then we had this kind of selection of random cuts to benefits. So we had, a sort of thought through thing in working age benefits came as sort of the first wave, and then we had this random cut to benefits, which includes, as you say, disability benefits, some changes to the work assessments and the how the assessment on how severe your disability is. That got Labour MPs outraged. That's when the head of steam really went up. That didn't seem to have much rhyme or reason apart from Rachel Reeves seeing a figure that she needed to cut and just looking round for random cuts.
Is she bright?
She is bright. I think at the moment she's got herself in a bit of a doom loop, and they need to get out of the doom loop.
What about this spat between Rayner and Reeves?
Well, I'm not sure it's a spat between Rayner and Reeves so much as Rayner laying down a marker for the future. Now, of course, we all believe Angela Rayner when she says she didn't leak the document, and frankly, I don't imagine Angela did. But whether somebody thought it was in Angela's interests to leak it, leaked it, or whether it got leaked from the other side.
Could you see a leadership challenge to Starmer?
No, I think it's almost impossible under the Labour Party rules to engineer. We've never done it, apart from the one botched attempt to get rid of Corbyn in opposition. It's never happened to a Labour Prime Minister. I can see the point where it gets untenable for him. I mean, just in terms of the sort of sequencing, I think we're a long way from that yet. But would she stand? I think she probably would. I don't think she'd press for a vacancy. The Labour Party doesn't. The Labour Party's a very soft, sentimental party. We're not like the Tories who can knife it back after 49 days.
Is she bright? I'm going to go
Which
around
one,
your question.
Angela or Rachel?
And we've done Rachel, so Angela.
Yeah, actually, look, Angela was. Rachel. It was an economist at the Bank of England. She then went off to work in Halifax in Leeds. In Halifax, it would say she could nurse her seat in Leeds, and that's when she ended up in accounts or complaints or whatever department she did. But I first met Rachel when she was at Oxford.
Angela.
And so Angela is clearly not an Oxford-educated economist, but she's got a good gut instinct. Actually, so there were some things in the note that were perfectly sensible, and I think that I respect Angela for the background that she's come from. One of the things she did, for example. She stood up to Jeremy Corbyn when she was one of the few who was in the shadow cabinet. He wanted to spend all the money on students. She wanted to keep the policy as being for early years education, which makes a massively bigger difference, particularly to kids from modest incomes. You've got to make sure they can read and write at 3, 4 and 5 rather than spending it all on middle class kids at 18. So I've got huge respect for her. I don't actually see either of them as Prime Minister.
No, I can't say I do either. Long time before we get a Labour female PM, it seems, or Labour female leader. Do you know, when it comes to this, the 2-child benefits cap, I kind of sometimes sit there and go, is anybody actually speaking to women about this? It's so blimmin' obvious. Women we want to incentivise women who are working to be able to have children. Crashes in offices. I just think it's so nursery.
Absolutely.
That's better than wanging 100 quid in someone's bank account per child every month.
Yeah.
Actually make it possible anyway.
And the thing everybody forgets on the two, it should actually be called the 2 children benefit cap, because it's a range of benefits after 2 children, not just child benefits. So it's actually really, especially when we've been having the row about child benefit generally, people get, which is in the Angela Rayner memo, is to phase out to claw back child benefit for upper middle income families. So this is actually the real reason the Labour left hate it is if you do have you have a third or a fourth a child, you're in poverty, you're not getting extra benefit for that kid. That kid is on the technical measure pushed into poverty because they're not getting extra support and the family's reliant on benefits. The Tories introduced it. They thought it was to try and get people to have some people who couldn't afford to bring up their family. Yes, there's support there, but there's a limit. There's a kind of line in the sand.
That's tonight to be everybody, hasn't it? Basically, in this day and age.
So that's what the row's about.
Let's talk now about Lucy Connolly, because Charlie Kirk came over, did a bit of British media, learnt about the Lucy Connolly appeal and went, well, this smells a bit funny. I'm going to dob you into Mark Marco Rubio, who might have a thing or two to say to Donald, who might have a thing or two to say on tariffs and freedom of speech in the United Kingdom. My views on this are just absolutely clear. Absolutely clear. She shouldn't be in prison, full stop. I'm not even going to debate the length of time. To me, it's absolutely abhorrent that this poor woman, who is a childminder looking after kids of all different ethnicities, said something abhorrent on Twitter. And actually, when you look at the fullness of the statement, certain caveats, which are always cut out of the synopsis, such as, you know, should I care, and things like I'm just thinking about the parents of those kids, and then the subsequent post she made, it's always just focuses down on that top line. I mean, she said something in a moment of passion because she suffered such trauma, and yeah, I look at that and I just think I've done that so many times. I might not have done it on social media, but I can be accused of that. I think most women can be accused of that, probably most men as well. And if it had been a trial, I just don't think they could have easily found justification for incitement, and I don't think there'd have been a prison sentence. And I don't understand why this government don't seem to realise that this is a big problem. That other countries are going to look at that and go, you look a bit like a nutto tyranny at the moment.
So look, I think it's a mess. I think nobody will doubt that. First of all, though, I think it's absolutely outrageous if the US government tries to interfere with the British legal process.
But why not? Because we would tell other countries off. We interfered in the Iranian process, getting Nazanin back, didn't we?
Well, we don't. Well, that's because Lucy Connolly is not, as far as I know, an American citizen. You know, in that case, you're talking about a British dual national. You know, I'm firmly against the death penalty, but I don't think Keir Starmer should be standing up at Prime Minister's questions and saying, I'm sending observers to those states of the United States that have the death penalty. I'm going to raise it in every meeting with Donald Trump.
But we do talk about freedom of speech in other countries, don't we?
Yeah, and I think you have got freedom of speech here, because this is a very complicated, it's not complicated case, it's actually simple, but it's a nightmare, is that she pleaded guilty. And the problem is, once she pleaded guilty, there's a limit to what you can do.
Why did the CPS tell all these people to plead guilty? Why?
Well, I don't know.
When it was rubbish
if the CPS did, I mean, you know, she had her independent lawyer. I mean, so, you know, she had a lawyer like anybody else in the system. Now, whether or not she's got questions about that lawyer, I don't know.
A lot of people were told, it's been widely reported.
Yeah.
I mean, it sort of came up in her appeal as well.
I mean, people know that
if you... urged to do
she might have just panicked, which is what a lot of people do, because if you panic and you plead guilty, then you think you're going to get a shorter sentence.
Of course.
So actually, so once she pleaded guilty, the judge or the magistrates had no choice but to impose that sentence, because that's what the law is.
Poor woman. When you think
so
of that
what do you do, Alex? Because you can't suddenly, and the Prime Minister can't suddenly sort of.
Well, they seem to like letting out rapists and all the rest of them.
Well, she must certainly be treated exactly the same way as anybody else.
She don't get visitation rights.
I don't understand why that is. That seems to me daft.
That's not just daft, it's dark.
Yeah, that seems to me. I mean, if that's true, I don't understand.
Yeah, she doesn't. Well, she doesn't, and that to me is evil.
Right. Well, that seems to me. I don't understand that.
She's not allowed out to go see a kid at Christmas.
I mean, I think what she needs to do is be treated the same as everybody else. I suspect that she will be out quite soon because of frankly, the early release programme will kick in. The problem with when it was reviewed, when it went to appeal, was that the actual original sentence wasn't at the top end of what you could give under the circumstances. It was bang in the middle, so they didn't feel it had been unfair on a legal point. Now, whether or not she'd have been found guilty at trial, if she hadn't pleaded guilty, is another point. So it's become a complete mess. I think.
Do you think
I don't think she particularly should be in jail for that long a time.
Do you
I
think
wish
she
she'd
was
had
used
a
as
trial.
an example?
No, I don't think there was undue pressure on her to plead guilty. What I suspect, it was a mixture of she was seeing people around her. Well, whatever her lawyer said to her, you know, every solicitor in that case has to tell the person that if you do plead guilty, you will get a shorter sentence. But that will be taken into account in the sentencing. So they have to tell them that. It's a duty of care. She made that decision. Clearly, in retrospect, it looks to many people like it was the wrong decision. If it had gone to trial, it would either have been she wouldn't have gone to jail at all, or it would have been, you know, some of the charges would have been dropped. The incitement bit would have been dropped, and therefore it would have been.
It makes me so sorry, because I just think someone like that would have been just scared out of her tree.
I mean,
wouldn't have known what they were doing. And if someone says, "Look, do this," she'd have just gone, "Yes,
She's
I'll
hardly
do
been
that."
around the system like a lot of people in those circumstances. So it would have been any of us would find ourselves in that situation. It's hugely intimidating.
You would hope that common sense would have a part to play. I still think this is just absolutely grotesque. It sends a shiver down my spine, and the irrevocable damage that will be doing to her family. A 12-year-old daughter denied having a mum for 3 years. It's wicked.
Yeah, I mean, it's a 3-year sentence. She'll be out in 18 months at the very latest in terms of the sentence because of the 50% rule. I'm sure she's behaving herself while she's in there, so that's at the moment the biggest factor. Let's hope that she's home soon, and let's hope though that it is a deterrent to people, because what she said was wrong. I mean, to me, I'm not a lawyer. It's on the edge of incitement.
I don't want people to live in. Look, it was wrong, but I think
it was on the edge. I think it probably did. For me, it seems to tip over into incitement, but it was on that edge of whether it tipped in. We can't have people say, I'm totally in favour of free speech, but not incitement to violence or to hatred, which is what the cases generally were banded in. But clearly, maybe it's time for Parliament to look again at the law under which she was sentenced, which wasn't, of course, a law passed by the Labour government. It was a law already on the statute book.
Right, let's take a short break now. Matthew is going to be staying with us when we come back. We're going to be talking more about the fact you're not allowed to say chemical castration because you might upset some pedos. A primary school teacher found with 2 kitchen knives in the bad, teenagers fighting with hammers on a cricket pitch. Welcome to England! We'll be talking about all of that with Mike Neville, former Met Police Detective Chief Inspector, after this.
fashionable in his sort of circles and in these sort of middle class circles to hold those views, and that's why sort of people continue to push this one side of a debate, which is clearly extremely complicated, and it's not for people who are just woke signalling to wade into and just be like, oh look, we're going to support one side over the other. Clearly it's not a straightforward issue, otherwise it would have been resolved a long time ago.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This.
Well, hello there. Welcome back. Matthew Laza is still joining me. And hopefully we can dial in Mike Neville, former Met Police Detective Chief Inspector, to add his voice as well to the conversation. Good afternoon, Mike.
Hello, Alex, and happy bank holiday to you. I hope you, like me, you're not having a day off.
No rest for the wicked, I'm afraid. What is this bank holiday? I never know, because in May you get like spring bank holiday. Is it Whitsun? Then you got the May bank holiday, which is going to be in June.
Yeah, you have the original ones for the workers, isn't it?
Right. It's
May the 1st.
Bank holiday.
That was a Labour bank holiday.
Anyway, let's talk about this rather, I mean, in the world of hurty words and be careful what you say, not allowed to say chemical castration, apparently. Probation staff have been told not to use that phrase because sex offenders might be upset by it. Instead, they've got to talk about providing medication to manage problematic sexual arousal. I mean, Mike, come on.
It's just stupid, isn't it, Alex? It's just like it's the whole left-wing establishment and the stupid way of speaking. You know, we couldn't call them gangs in the police. You had to call them groups. We've got the stupid situation where male rapists are demanding to be called she in court, and the victim having to refer to them as she or her. It is an absolute load of old nonsense, and we should be telling these sex offenders this is what's on offer, because they're saying it's voluntary chemical castration. But to be honest, I've no faith in any of these things. The only way to stop sex offenders, particularly those who offend against children, is to lock them up forever and never let them out. When you let out burglars or thieves, you take a chance that they might not burgle or thieve again. If they do these things, it's not very nice for the victim. But people who commit sex offences, particularly against children, ruin lives. And we get told all this nonsense about community sentences and tagging and whatever else. And my research has shown that about 25% of the tag breaches have anything done about them. And that might be as little as somebody coming around your house and saying, you shouldn't have done that. They're not even arrested. So, as I say, with sex offenders, let's talk straight to them, but let's be brutal with them, particularly those who offend against children, and just lock them up in a dark dungeon and they're never released again.
But if it is a voluntary scheme, perhaps saying chemical castration, most people might not sign up for that. But if they say, look, whatever reason, you're wonky, you fancy kids, but there is something you can do about it, have some of these pills, that more people might say, do you know what, I would rather have that as an option. I don't want to offend again. So perhaps, what do you think about that, Matthew? Is this sort of a case of, oh, Hartley-Brewer's got to be nice, going mad down the woke route, or might there be some logic behind it?
Well, I think the particular logic behind it is that they're worried that the doctors won't do it and they need the doctors to sign it off. So therefore, I think that's why it's been given this sort of medicalised term, because obviously when you say chemical castration, what it actually means is giving people pills to reduce their libido. I mean, hugely. I mean, not like mildly, not a sort of mild calm down dear pill, but you know, a serious course of drugs. And of course, and doctors have been happy to do these trials because the patients who've been on the trials have been volunteers. Now the government is looking at making it mandatory, potentially looking at making it mandatory. They're worried that the doctors won't do it. So that's what I think it's. I think it's more getting the docs to do it than just having a woke phrase for the sake of being woke.
Cast some light on that. Now, Mike, a primary school teacher has been struck off after police found 2 large kitchen knives in her bag. She was searched after police were called to a disturbance at a property. She taught at the Merlin Top Primary Academy in Keighley in Yorkshire. She pleaded guilty to possessing a bladed article in a public place, given a 12-week suspended jail term. She avoided prison because the knives were not brandished and were only found when police searched her bag. What on earth is going on here?
Well, let's look at this case, because this woman, Laura Jenkins, was found, as you say. She claimed she'd gone out with the wrong bag. I don't know about you, Alex. I've not got any bags that have got a 10-inch kitchen knife and an 8-inch kitchen knife in them. But 2 issues that really flagged me up and compare it against the Lucy Connolly case is, firstly, if you look at Lucy Connolly, she was sentenced very, very swiftly. This case goes back to the summer of 2022. It's nearly 3 years old. And also, what is the purpose of prison? The purpose of prison, in my view, is to keep decent and hard-working people safe. And so they're safe from tweets. Tweets do not hurt. What do hurt are knives. And what we have is a situation where Lucy Connolly gets 30 months in prison for a tweet. This woman, Jenkins, receives a 12-week sentence for suspended for 12 months. So that means she doesn't go to jail at all. It just seems the delay in justice and the fact that somebody has got awful offensive weapons and has committed other offences prior to this, and then they don't go to jail. It just seems two-tier justice, and it's not good enough.
I struggle to understand why a primary school teacher, of all people, is walking around with massive blades in their bag. I don't know enough about this case, and I don't have the answers to that, but it just seems anathema to her particular profession. Let's talk about this one. There's a cricket club in Merseyside at Maghull.
It's a long way from the scissors that you used to know, the primary school scissors that you used to get, which for people like me who weren't very good when they were like 6 at cutting round circles, had to have those special scissors. It's a long way to a 10-inch kitchen.
I know, it's wild, isn't it?
Things
like,
normally have smooth edges in primary schools.
I know, it's like you're going to like a sushi class or something.
I mean,
very weird. But there's this cricket club in Merseyside which needs to build a massive fence to basically stop the local kids treating it as some sort of gladiatorial arena. They meet there, setting off fireworks, attacking each other with hammers and knives. I mean, dear Lord, what is going on? This knife crime thing is so weird to me. It is so weird how any kid would want to go about meeting up at a playing field to potentially fatally harm someone.
Again, and well, with the police here, the police are put under much pressure here. You know, they're told, oh, you're searching children. The person arrested here was 14 in possession of drugs and a knife. The police cannot help who commits crime, and they've got to crack down on this. And successive governments, both Tory and Labour, have really put pressure on the police to reduce stop and search. And what we see time and time again, and there's been a recent report showing this, that stop and search saves lives. It might upset people, but hands in pockets don't kill. Knives in guts, they do. And what sort of bizarre situation we have here that kids can think they can just turn up en masse. I think there's about 50 kids turning up to this with knives, hammers, fighting, stopping the decent kids, of course, having a game of cricket. But I think what it is, Alex, is that people know there's little consequence.
Yeah.
So less than 30% of those caught carrying a knife, as we've just seen with our school teacher individual, go to prison. How is that? Surely the government, if they wanted to stop this, they could come on the TV and say, look, right, I'm telling you now, if you get caught unlawfully with a knife, you will go to jail automatically. But what they just don't do that. And even people who are caught twice with a knife don't go to jail. It's ridiculous. And what it does is it puts the public in fear, and it tells criminals they can do what they want.
Now, interesting, we were talking earlier, weren't we, Matthew, about incitement to violence. Now, I'm not exactly an aficionado of the drill scene or the grime landscape, but I'm pretty sure that within that...
an image of you.
You're getting out my oeuvre.
There's more moves
Yeah,
for those who can't see. There's more moves.
But we do know that within that oeuvre of music, there's plenty of what I would consider incitement to violence with apparently real-world effects. A lot of these kids are listening to this stuff. They're too young. We once had the conversation about video games, didn't we, and warping young people's minds. Without a doubt...
I'm old enough, I can remember when it was video nasties on VHS.
Right.
But I'm showing my age there.
But without a doubt, there's a lot of pop culture out there, particularly in the UK rap scene, that is glorifying knives. And why are we not talking about that? Because clearly there's a load of complex issues. Mike's talking about the fact that people carry knives without consequence. Totally agree with that. Also, the idea that you've got to carry knife as a form of defence. Fine. But we don't talk about the glorification of this stuff. And no one is willing to crack down on some of this music and say that's an incitement to violence because of cultural sensitivities.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I wonder if, you know, as you say, if people don't show outrage now in the way they have in the past over glorification of violence because, you know, they're concerned about sort of offending particular ethnic groups. I mean, I think Labour has tried to do more on knives. It has put forward a policy on ninja knives and on samurai swords to make it harder. One of the problems we have now is people can buy online, and, you know, those kind of online checks where, you know, checks in inverted commas, because it's basically you'll be asked for your ID when the goods are delivered, and I think very rarely are they delivered. Does that happen? I think just a box is ticked by hard-pressed delivery drivers, etc. So I think that there are things that can be done, and I think that knife crime is perhaps the #1 issue in policing and on our streets.
It really is, Mike. Thank you ever so much. Matthew's going to stay with us after the break. We're going to be getting an update from Israel, because a truly astonishing story that I saw the other day, the fact that actually there's going to be potentially a report coming out from an Israeli news channel about how much money going to Hamas is actually being found coming from the UK. We're also going to be talking about Britain giving money to UNICEF, but then when it gets to the country, Hamas decides how it's spent. I'm going to be joined by the brilliant Eylon Levy, who is former Israeli government spokesman and host of Israel's State of a Nation podcast. You'll know him when you see him. He's up after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. Oh my goodness. Honestly, sometimes you're a fly on the wall during advert breaks. You've heard some funny conversations. Anyway, I'm going to welcome to the programme Elon Levy. Alicia has told me that this... Because Elon, I've got to apologise to you. Every time I speak to you, I slightly change the way I pronounce your name because I'm like Elon Levy.
I do the same thing when I introduce myself. It's all right.
Elon Levi. I'm like...
Believe me, I've been called worse in Britain.
So we go with Elon Levy.
Perfect.
Boom! I'm going to remember that forever. And thankfully it rhymes. It's got a lovely amount of assonance in there. Right, now, first of all, it's not on my little story list here, but one of the reasons I spoke to my producer Ted yesterday and said I really want to speak to Elon is because of a tweet you had put up about apparently there's going to be a disclosure over in Israel about the amount of Hamas funding coming from the UK.
Yeah, this is staggering. An Israeli organisation called NGO Monitor has revealed that Britain is indirectly financing Hamas. It's astonishing, but the British public really needs to smart up to what the Foreign Office bureaucrats have been doing. The UK gives money to UNICEF, which partners with a Hamas ministry to hand out cash in Gaza. It's staggering. And in the risk assessment obtained from the British consulate in Jerusalem, they acknowledge there is a severe risk of aid being diverted because, you know, once you take cash out of the ATM, no one can monitor where it's going. Now, this Hamas ministry that UNICEF partners with is headed by a senior Hamas warlord called Ghazi Hamid. Ghazi Hamid, after the October 7th massacre, went on TV and said this was justified. We'll do October 8th, October 9th, October 10th, October 1 millionth. This is the Hamas ministry that UNICEF is partnering with to hand out cash that is coming directly from British taxpayers. It's really unbelievable.
But yet, the UK, like, what's his face, Mark Carney, that's it, I had a bit of a senior moment there, Mark Carney in Canada, Emmanuel Macron in France, are sort of taking a tough line at the moment with Israel, aren't they? What do you think's gone wrong in this country? Why do you think they've been sort of browbeaten by all the protests we have in the UK?
There's clearly intense political pressure in the UK and Canada and France to throw Israel under a bus. Britain has decided that it is content for the war that Hamas started on October 7th to end with Hamas in power. You know, David Lammy can bang as much as he wants on the dispatch box and say Hamas can have no role in the future governance of Gaza, but unless the Israeli army removes it from power, the Hamas terrorist regime is going to remain in control in Gaza. Now, Israel is fighting. They say they have to release the hostages, and Hamas has to step down or there'll be another war in Gaza, and we don't want another war in Gaza. And it's disappointing that the countries that understood after that it's happy to pressure Israel to, you know, give up all its leverage over Hamas. It's a terrible decision. And, well, you know, Hamas has praised Britain for that decision. And that's really all you need to know.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a good look when Hamas are praising you. Stay with us, Elon. I'm just going to speak to Matthew Larser, not from Gaza. Look, I mean, the Labour Party are taking a far tougher line when it comes to Netanyahu and the policy. We found out last night that an Israeli strike on a Gaza shelter has left at least 31 dead. An American aid chief has quit. But Elon says, perhaps quite rightly, how on earth can Israelis sleep in their bed at night if they know they haven't got the job done?
Well, I mean, the issue is that I don't think that what they're doing at the moment is getting the job done. I don't think it will lead to the eradication of Hamas. What I think it will lead to is huge anger and the loss of allies across the world. I'm a huge believer in Israel's right not only to exist but to defend itself. I think that the whole world was united after the terrible October the 7th attacks in acknowledging Israel's right to take action against Hamas. But I think that the tactics being employed by the Netanyahu government at the moment are wrong, and I think that, you know, the impact on civilians is just unacceptable. And I think that both the governments of both the UK, Canada, and France are right to call Netanyahu out. Just being anti some of what Israel doesn't mean you are anti-Israel. In fact, rather the reverse. It means if you've got Israel's best interests at heart, strongly believe that aid needs to get into the Gaza Strip and that the current tactics need to be re-examined. Nobody's talking about handing it back over to Hamas.
I mean, Elon, let's dig down into that because, I mean, aid into the Gaza Gaza Strip is notoriously difficult, isn't it? Because very often Hamas is nicking aid, using it to furnish their own power and leverage. Also, I don't think they mind seeing their people starve. We know already, looking at UNRWA, that various aid agencies have been infiltrated by Hamas, and understandably, Israel's very nervous about what might be in those trucks, wanting to check everything. But at the same time, you know, Matthew's also got a point that if you want to get a people who are on your side and don't want to sort of will you dead in the future, there's going to be a lot of people in the Gaza Strip who are not a fan of Israel at any point in their lives. How on earth can you manage this? What do you need to happen now? What should the international community be doing now to somehow find a way to make sure that citizens of Gaza, who have nothing to do with Hamas, might well hate their guts, are protected? And yet at the same time that cancer can be extracted from the territory?
Well, the world should do three things. First of all, pressure Hamas to surrender, lay down your arms, go into exile, release the hostages, and this war can end tomorrow. Secondly, help civilians get out of Hamas strongholds. People are being killed because Hamas is fighting out of school buildings and hospitals and mosques and UN facilities deliberately to generate negative headlines or to get immunity for itself by hiding in these buildings. So help civilians get out of the danger zone. And the third thing, work with Israel on getting aid directly to the people who need it while making sure that Hamas cannot steal it. The existing system is broken. Hamas has infiltrated it, it has hijacked it, it has used it to finance this war and prolong it in order to pay the fighters who are starving the hostages. And Israel is now trying to put in place a creative mechanism to get aid to civilians and bypass Hamas. But you know who doesn't want it? The UN. Because UN agencies are trying to keep their own monopoly over aid distribution. They don't want to admit how their system is broken. They don't want to give up power to other organizations. So they're insisting on keeping a broken, corrupt system that Hamas has infiltrated to finance its war machine. You know, your previous guest, this war is horrible. It needs to end. But it needs to end with the removal of Hamas from power and the return of the hostages. And if Britain really wants to help bring about the end of Hamas, it shouldn't just bang on the dispatch box and say Hamas must relinquish power. You and what army? It should send its best military advisors, those who remember what it was like to fight ISIS, to dislodge that terrorist group from Syria and Iraq and end its terrorist regime, and help Israel find ways to
do you reckon the IDF
Hamas
would be up for that, though? Would the IDF be up for foreign eyes, you know, in their barracks with them or in their control centres with them, seeing what's going on?
No, absolutely. The IDF has already learned from American advisors how they fought against ISIS and Fallujah. I mean, at the moment, the IDF is the one teaching other militaries, because Israel is fighting here on the most difficult urban battlefield anyone has ever seen. When the UK crushed ISIS, ISIS didn't have 400 miles of tunnels underneath Mosul. It wasn't holding on to British hostages, well, certainly not 250 British hostages in Mosul. It wasn't firing missiles at Britain. It hadn't spent years hiding inside schools and homes and mosques and hospitals. So Israel is fighting an urban environment here that no army has ever seen. And what I'm scared about is that this war is going to end with Hamas in power, vindicating its human shield strategy. That the lesson Hamas will learn from this war is we can hide in schools and hospitals and get away with it because Britain will pressure Israel to back off. And if that happens, terrorist groups around the world are going to be learning from Hamas's playbook.
I mean, he's got a point, hasn't he, that what we're not really hearing from the UK government, yes, there's occasional lip service to Hamas should free the hostages, but the anger's gone out of it, the ire, the sort of, you know, passionate opposition to terrorism just seems to have been whittled away.
Well, I'm not sure about that, Alex. I mean, in fact, if you look at what happens inside Israel, the parents and relatives of many of the hostages are those who are loudest in their condemnation of the tactics of the Netanyahu government, because they think they are the tactics that are least likely to bring the hostages home. So I think, firstly, we need to remember that there are a lot of people inside Israel who are, are firmly opposed.
What did you have for breakfast this morning? That's the second time I've detected it's re-emerged.
I'm now complete. So on this very serious subject, so I think that, you know, there the returning the hostages has not gone off the West's agenda, but you're not going to get the hostages returned by the scenes we're seeing. We cannot see support for Israel melt across the world because of the tactics of the government in terms of the aid and in terms of pushing people out of almost, or, pushing civilians out of almost all of the space. And we cannot have the Netanyahu government, going around saying that Israel is going to completely control the Gaza Strip at the end of this. That is not tenable. It is not Israeli territory.
This is the problem, isn't it, Elon? Which is, look, everyone knows that I'm a strident supporter of Israel. I'm listening to Douglas Murray's book at the moment, and my God, it boils my blood is an understatement. But the problem is, this is a propaganda war. As you said, so much of this is deliberately confected to whip up emotion around the world, get these protests on our streets. Metropolitan Police have dismissed complaints about pro-Palestinian protests in the UK, which glorified the October the 7th of massacre. A protester chanting, "I love the 7th of October. I like any organisation that starts with an H." We know that means Hezbollah, Hamas and the Houthis, no doubt. And I think we've been far too lily-livered in standing up to this wicked terrorist propaganda on our streets. I agree with freedom of protest, but I worry as well how much of all of this is rounding up people as a recruiting exercise to build up some sort of would-be future army in Britain against the state. The difficulty is the way things are going. We know the press aren't allowed into Gaza at the moment, apart from the very occasional exception. Even when all things are said and done, my big worry is when foreign eyes go into that territory and see the state of it, Israel's going to be in a bit of bother.
There's so much fake news. You're talking about a propaganda war. Just look at the hoax that the UN spread last week. Tom Fletcher, the UN relief chief, made up a hoax that 14,000 babies are going to die in 48 hours if the UN doesn't reach them. Even the UN had to retract that and say that it was wrong, and the BBC uncovered it. He didn't think for a moment to think how stupid it sounded, and it was repeated by 13 MPs in Parliament, and it was completely false from beginning to end. But we see what these lies are doing. Look at the terror attack in Washington last week. 2 young Jews were murdered outside the Capitol Jewish Museum by a man shouting "Free Palestine." We've seen protests calling "globalize the Intifada." That was a wave of suicide bombings in Israel, saying "bring the war home." And they just did. And 2 young Jews in Washington were murdered because of it. That is where this hate is leading.
But would it not be better strategy then? Because like I said, look, Israel's got my full support, and I know this is a propaganda war. My worry is when all is said and done and foreign eyes go into Gaza and it looks like apocalypse now, that it's going to embolden Hamas even more. And I'm not saying you shouldn't be attacking Hamas or, fighting back at all. I'm just trying to think ahead here and what the strategy is going to be. Would it be a good idea to allow professional war correspondents into Gaza? Because that's not been anything that's been permitted since the outbreak of this.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the images from Gaza of destruction are horrific, and Hamas laid a trap for Israel. Hamas dug a network of tunnels longer than the London Underground under the whole of Gaza, and the tunnel shafts poke out inside people's homes, very often under children's beds. I've spoken to so many soldiers who've told me that. Inside schools, inside mosques, even UN facilities. Hamas was running its server farm from underneath UNRWA's headquarters in Gaza. Now, that whole network of tunnels is a legitimate military target, and that explains the destruction you're seeing above ground. But notice how Hamas is trying to manipulate people. It's telling Israel, if you attack us, it's going to look really bad on TV. But if you don't attack us, then our military infrastructure is still intact, and we live to fight another day and prepare for the next time we can invade Israel and massacre Israelis at a music festival. So when Israelis decide between being alive and being liked, they say we prefer to be alive and to crush the terrorist regime that is threatening to invade us again, even if it means that in Britain people are going to disapprove, and then people like me go on TV to try to explain what you're seeing and how Hamas is playing mind games with you.
Yeah, Elon, look, I agree with everything you say. I'm a strident supporter of Israel. I do think you're on the front line. I think the West is being woefully weak-willed over this, but at the same time, I also understand the horrors of the optics of the lot of it. We're going to take a short ad break now, and then Matthew, Lazo and I are going to be here to take your calls and read your messages. So this is your last opportunity to join us today before David Bull comes in and looks after you for the next 3 hours. If you want to speak to Matthew and I, it's 0344 499 1000, normal network rate and all that. You can WhatsApp me 0344 499 1000. 8722 on the text, put talk before your message. I'll see you after this.
Let's talk about this. I think it's fair to say, Duncan, that the Conservative Party is in free fall at the moment. And I was watching Kemi Badenoch at PMQs on Wednesday. Yep. She was better.
She was better.
I don't think she landed any great punches. And actually, she's against a terrible performer anyway. So Keir Starmer is absolutely dreadful. If he says working people one more time, £22 billion on, I mean, he must have some sort of checkbox list of things he has to say.
It's back of his folder. I've seen him do it.
Oh, he does?
I'm convinced there's a page. I don't know 100% for sure.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back. Where am I? There I am. Didn't know where I was for a minute then. I looked like I was down a black hole or something. Here I am, not in a Hamas tunnel. Right, let's read some of your messages now. Let's start off with Israel. Why doesn't Israel separate the women and children somewhere safe? Then dismantle Hamas without the threat of hurting any more innocent people. That's Sharon in Cheshire. Interesting, but... Women aren't necessarily all innocents, though. Children, one thing, but can you take children away from parents?
It's very difficult. It's very difficult. What we need is a ceasefire and a proper solution, because it's.
But wouldn't a ceasefire just enable Hamas to sort of?
Well, I mean, I think, Alex, you hit the nail on the head with the issue of, are you just breeding really, really militant supporters, people who weren't supporters of Hamas initially, but who just don't like...
Will be now.
You don't like it, and will be now, absolutely.
Oh, everyone who lives in Gaza will hate Israel, and another October the 7th will return. Yeah, that's what Jeremy says, and well, that's exactly the point. I think the problem is a lot of people in that region hate Israel full stop, and no amount of bombs is going to change things. It's an unholy mess.
I mean, the big question is what happens next, isn't it? Is that if there was a ceasefire, you know, the people on the right of the Israeli government want Israel to be in full charge of the Gaza Strip. That's not going to work with world opinion or international law. So what's going to happen in between?
Should happen? I think there needs to be a sort of consortium of neighbouring countries, because a lot of those countries in that region are absolutely done with Islamism. They don't want it. It holds back the economies, and also it's got a lovely. It sounds terrible, like Trump said. It's got a lovely bit of beach down there, and if you actually allowed a consortium to come in to all help rebuild Gaza with luxury hotels, which provides jobs, which provides, you know, economic prosperity. It's usually that which actually helps people go, actually, I don't want to be an Islamist anymore because this way I have a better life.
That's what you've seen in the countries in the Gulf region, which have obviously become so wealthy and have developed so much. So clearly, I think it's a huge part of the other countries in the region. And of course, there's some of the richest countries in the world. They're going to have to pick up some of the bill.
Yeah, they don't want to pick up any of the refugees, though, do they? That is a big problem. Let's speak to John now, who's in Sutton. Hello there, John.
Afternoon, Alex.
Good afternoon. What's on your mind, my darling?
Yeah, I wanted to say I think Nigel is spot on in scrapping the two-child policy.
Ooh, because most people on the messages are really anti this. So what is why do you think this is such an important policy?
Because it's consistent. It's consistent with their overall policy of net zero immigration. If we want more Brits, when we make them ourselves, we don't import more foreigners and give them British passports. This is what they've been doing for decades.
Now, there are some people out there who are saying the problem is the average, you know, working class, middle class Brit are exactly the people not having kids, and the people who are having the kids are the people on the benefits, people who've come in from abroad and are actually a drain on the system, not contributing to the economy. And actually, if you delve down into the detail of this policy and the benefits cap for 2 children, it is all tied to out of work benefits. So you can't really apply a policy that one person is entitled to it and the other person isn't. Could it backfire?
Well, that's a good point that you make. Generally speaking, like in Hungary, they're doing everything they can to increase the birth rate in Hungary and to encouraging Hungarians to have more children.
Yeah, but they do tax breaks, don't they, for workers largely in Hungary. They say to mothers, if you have 1 child, you get this. If you have 2, you get that. If you get 3, you never pay tax again for the rest of your life. But cutting the benefits or increasing benefits is actually not so much giving someone a tax break, but giving a handout. Do you think there should be a refocus maybe of the policy? We don't even know what the policy is. It's worthwhile saying that. We don't know what it is yet, do we? It's going to be announced tomorrow.
Yeah, but I think he's heading in the right direction. Put it that way. I agree with you. I think there's lots of different things they can do, like having creches at work, things like that. Lots of different things they can do. But we do need to increase the birth rate. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, well, like I keep saying, just put some creches in offices and make a nursery in every single neighbourhood affordable to anybody who wants to work and have kids. I mean, I don't understand why that seems to be nuclear science. I don't understand. We're in like 2025 and apparently propagating the human race by making it easy for mothers to work seems to be anathema to most politicians. I mean, no offence to News UK and Mr. Rupert Murdoch. We love you, boss on high. But, you know, I'm in this massive building now. We've got a canteen that is amazing. We've got beautiful views out of London. There's a coffee cart down there in the hallway. There's little offices and things that outside companies, you know, production companies can rent. One of them looks like giant adult soft play area. It's like Tumbleland. And I kind of think, but what doesn't it have? If I were to get knocked up tomorrow and wanted to come and do my presenting shift, do you know what might be quite useful? Coming into the office and going, here you go, baby Alex. You go there, I'm going to go on the airwaves, and when I finish, go and get baby Alex and go home. That, to me, would be immediately, I go, great, I can have children. The fact that it doesn't exist is the very reason why I don't think right now I can. It's that blimmin' simple. Why does no one ask a woman?
And I think that hundreds of thousands of women will feel exactly the same as you. And, you know, workplace crashes, which were a bit of a thing in years gone by, seem to have fallen out of fashion. What we need to do, all the evidence shows, the better the childcare, the higher percentage of women you get in the workforce, the richer your country is, just us Scandinavians.
But when you look at the cost of nurses, not that I've really dug into this because I'm not in that zone right now, but from everyone I've spoken to, it's so much money. What with rent and energy bills and everything else, it's like, well, it's ridiculous.
And there's a huge recruitment crisis in getting people to work in early years as well. So there's a lot more that needs to be done. But I think that is all the evidence from every country in the world shows that the more you invest in childcare, the better it is for women and the better it is in terms of your economic success as this country.
Here's a man who is nodding in the background.
I thought you were going to say, here's a man who knows about childcare.
Here's a man who knows absolutely naffle all about childcare.
Naffle,
but
absolutely.
Look, you know, we both know that we have friends.
Hello,
nice to see you.
It's lovely
we know
to see
we have friends.
Fine shirt he's wearing as well.
Well, I'm not sure. It looks like I'm going to chop down trees. But anyway, sorry, carry on.
He looks like he's chopping down trees.
Maybe it's a bank holiday thing, you
behind
know?
some sort of, you know, architectural office. You look like...
What? I think it looks like I'm going to an agricultural show.
I think, no, you look
What about an agricultural show? By the way, Suffolk show this week.
Have you seen what farmers wear? It ain't pink. A little hanky agricultural show.
I'm going to an agricultural show. I'm going to the Suffolk show on Wednesday. Anyway.
Are you going to wear that?
Yeah.
Are you?
No.
Exactly.
I don't know what I'm marrying.
Okay, I want
Yes,
the pop agricultural quiz question
Yeah,
for
oh
you.
no, go on. This is where I fail.
What is the name of the famous cart-pulling horse from Suffolk, the breed?
The Suffolk Punch.
Hey!
Boom. They're beautiful.
They'll be allowed in on
Wednesday now.
Yes, thank goodness. No, it's
they
brilliant.
have these cool little hairstyles.
Oh,
and
they're
stuff,
really beautiful horses as well.
lovely.
Absolutely stunning.
Well, there you go. You'll fit right in. Just wear some, Barber, some torn-up Barber and some muddy wellies.
Well, a gilet is
Yes,
the thing, apparently.
Absolutely. So I work in an office with lots of Tories, and they all wear gilets.
Yes.
And they think that I'm very Labour because I've got a tote bag.
You are.
And they think I'm very Labour.
Yes. Well, it is. Yes. Anyway, where were we?
Right, so
childcare.
Yeah, very quickly, I want to get your view on this because, like I was just screeching about, to me it's so simple. You want women to have more babies. You also want to make sure that they contribute economically.
Yes.
Creches in offices.
Agreed,
Done.
100%. 100%. And actually what we want is young women back into the office, but also at the same time to be able to provide childcare for their kids as well. But also we want British workers in employment in this country and stop relying on having people coming into this country where we don't need them. We need sort of self-grown people.
So you've got a couple of minutes. That's just a nice sort of big pregnant amount of time to stick with
no
the
pun
theme.
intended.
No pun intended.
So I was just going to say
was.
it's going terribly well for Keir Starmer, I think, don't you?
Oh, so well.
He's had better weeks.
He's had better weeks. I mean, so much to talk about, just in terms of... I just get the sense that he doesn't really have any policies. He doesn't really know which way he's going. There is no ideology apart from following the polls. You may correct me if you like.
I think there's a bit of consistency of direction. Well, I think some of the things...
I think some of the... directionlessness.
Well, that's what I think.
Well, I'm trying to be nice, but I think there's the narrative's that horrible word people use in politics,
Yes.
but what is the story? What's the narrative? What does the government stand for?
Well, that's a very good question. I'd have no idea. I don't think anyone else does, which is why people are falling away from the Labour Party, but also the Conservative Party in big trouble as they reach new lows in terms of the popularity.
And there's gossip, isn't there, that they're sharpening their knives again because everyone knows as soon as the Conservatives are in trouble,
I've heard there are knives being
leadership.
sharpened at Labour, but they're not as ruthless as the Tories.
And it's a much harder structure.
It's much harder to do it as well.
I mean,
so we'll talk about that. The NHS as well. Of course, you've got all these people earning over £200,000 a year. 300 people.
Very quickly on
Yes.
that. Now, I get that, when they do the compared to the Prime Minister and you haven't hit your targets, it's horrible. But surely you need people to come out that private sector who have some skills in running businesses to work in the NHS in executive roles, and they're not going to do it for 50 quid.